Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the journey of a letter across 1800s America, a saga where each envelope danced through a labyrinth of stagecoaches and steam engines, revealing a surprising reality, sometimes faster than you'd imagine, and other times a slow waltz through weeks of waiting. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. In the early 1800s, sending a letter across America was like trying to win a game of telephone with a string and two tin cans. Except the string was 500 miles long, and the cans were prone to getting lost. You think your Wi-Fi is slow? Try relying on a horse and buggy to deliver your latest heart take. In the days before the telegraph turned communication into the speed of light, a simple piece of mail had to navigate a logistical labyrinth that would make modern-day shipping companies break out in a cold sweat. Let's get down to the nuts and bolts first. Imagine living in 1815 and having a burning desire to tell your buddy in New York about the latest barn dance in Charleston. You'd better be ready to shell out some serious cash. Postage wasn't a flat rate back then. It was calculated by the number of sheets and the distance traveled. Sending a single sheet letter less than 40 miles could cost you 8 cents, but if your words had to cover 400 miles or more, you'd be looking at 25 cents. Now, 25 cents might sound like chump change, but back then, it was nearly a day's wages for many workers. For a letter, no emojis included. Once you forked over your hard-earned coin, the real fun began. The speed of delivery was, let's say, relaxed. In 1800, a letter from New York City to New Orleans could take over a month to arrive. That's assuming it didn't get lost, stolen, or become kindling for a cozy fire somewhere along the way. You see, the postal system back then was more of a postal suggestion. Roads were rough, and sometimes non-existent, meaning your letter was at the mercy of weather, geography, and the occasional highwayman who fancied himself a 19th-century Robin Hood. And just for kicks, let's add some social implications to this mix. Because mail was expensive, people weren't exactly penning epic sagas. Letters were short, sweet, and to the point. Think of them as the Twitter of the 1800s. If you wanted to keep up with relatives or business partners, you had to be concise. But if you were waiting on a letter, patience was key. Suspense of not knowing when, or if your message would arrive was just part of the charm, or the agony, depending on your perspective. Now, if you were expecting a letter, you didn't just sit back and wait for the postman to come knocking. Nope, you'd often have to trek to the nearest post office, which could be miles away, to see if anything had arrived. It was like checking your mailbox every day, except your mailbox was a day's journey on horseback. And if your letter was delayed, well, you could either curse the gods or accept it as a quirk of life, like rain on your wedding day or your horse getting spooked by a snake. The inefficiencies were so legendary that they spawned an entire genre of complaints. One famous example comes from John Adams, who in a fit of frustration wrote to his wife Abigail, lamenting the dilatory mail system that kept him in the dark about her health and their children's well-being. Imagine pouring your heart out in a letter, only for it to arrive weeks late. Talk about emotional whiplash. But let's not be too hard on the postal system of yore. It was a product of its time, navigating a country that was sprawling, rugged, and constantly changing. The postal roads were among the first national infrastructure projects, paving the way, literally, for the development of a more connected America. And despite its shortcomings, the mail system was a lifeline, a tangible thread that stitched together the fabric of a young nation. So while we can chuckle at the absurdity of a month-long delivery time, we should also tip our hats to those early postal workers who braved the elements, bandits, and bureaucratic red tape to connect people across vast distances. They were the original couriers of connection, the unsung heroes of communication in a time when saying, "I got your letter," was as momentous as hearing, "You've got mail," on AOL in the 90s. In an age where we can send a message across the globe in a matter of seconds, it's worth remembering that once upon a time, communication moved at the pace of a trotting horse. And while the idea of waiting weeks for news might seem like a nightmare today, back then it was just another day in the life of a letter trying to make its way across America. And so, with the speed of a horse's trot, we gallop into the mid-1800s, right when some ambitious folks decided that maybe, just maybe, the mail could use a bit of an upgrade. Enter the Pony Express, a name that conjures up images of gallant young riders, racing against the elements and time itself, all to deliver your heartfelt letter faster than you could say, yeehaw. But before you saddle up and ride off into this sunset, let's hit pause and dissect what was really going on. Picture this. It's 1860, and the United States is not quite the coast-to-coast empire you know today. California's gold rush has struck it rich a decade earlier, and suddenly you've got a whole lot of people on the West Coast wanting to know what's happening back east, and vice versa. But spoiler alert, the telegraph lines haven't connected the dots yet, so communication is still dragging its hooves. Enter the Pony Express, an ambitious venture launched by three businessmen, William Russell, Alexander Majors, and William Waddell, who believed that a relay of horseback riders could cut down the time it took for mail to travel from Missouri to California from weeks to a mere 10 days. That's right, 10 days. In the age of horse-drawn everything, this was practically warp speed. Now, let's talk logistics, because this wasn't just about finding a few cowboys and giving them a pat on the back. The Pony Express was an operation sprawling over 900 miles, with about 157 relay stations spread out every 10 to 15 miles. At each station, a fresh horse awaited, ready to bolt off like a caffeinated squirrel. Riders would swap horses at these stops, ensuring that both man and beast could maintain a breakneck pace. And speaking of the riders, let's debunk a little myth here. The image of the fearless, lone cowboy braving the wild. Romantic, sure, but the reality was a tad less glamorous. These riders were often young, wiry teens, the kind who could pass for jockeys, not the grizzled cowboys you'd expect. Why? Because a lighter rider meant a faster horse, and in this business, speed was the name of the game. But hold your horses, there's a catch. Despite its legendary status, the Pony Express was less a triumphant success and more a wild gamble on the future. Running a business that stretched across such an expanse came with costs that would make any investor's eyes water. Horses weren't cheap, nor was maintaining those remote relay stations, and paying the riders wasn't exactly a drop in the bucket either. The math was clear. Even charging $5 per half ounce of mail, this enterprise was bleeding cash faster than a cowboy could say, giddy up. And $5 back then. That was a small fortune, considering the average day's wage was about $1. Imagine paying a week's salary to send a letter. You'd better hope it was worth every penny. Economics aside, the riders faced dangers that no amount of pay could truly compensate for. The route crossed through some of the most rugged and hostile terrain in the country, from the blistering heat of the desert to the bone-chilling cold of the mountains. And then there were the less-than-friendly encounters with wildlife, and occasionally, hostile groups who weren't too keen on these interlopers galloping through their lands. As romantic as it sounds to be riding across the open plains, the reality was a grueling test of endurance and courage. But why did anyone think this was a good idea to begin with? Well, necessity is the mother of invention, or in this case, the mother of a very ambitious, if not slightly reckless, business venture. The Pony Express was born from a need to bridge the communication gap between the East and the rapidly growing West. It was a bold solution to a very real problem, even if it was a temporary one. Because, as fate would have it, technology was nipping at their heels. Enter the telegraph, a marvelous invention that, unlike the Pony Express, didn't require feeding, shoeing, or resting. By October 1861, the completion of the transcontinental telegraph line rendered the Pony Express obsolete almost overnight. The very thing that promised to make communication faster and more reliable had done just that, leaving our brave riders and their trusty steeds in the dust. The Pony Express had lasted a mere 18 months, a blink of an eye in the grand scheme of history. And yet, despite its brevity, the Pony Express carved out a place in the American mythos. It was a testament to human ingenuity and determination, even if it was ultimately a financial sinkhole. The stories of the riders, those daring young men who braved the frontier, became fodder for dime novels and Hollywood films, painting a picture of heroism that glossed over the grit and grind of the daily reality. It was a business model that was unsustainable, yet it captured the imagination like few others. Perhaps it's because the Pony Express represented something quintessentially American, the drive to conquer distance and connect a sprawling nation. So, while the Pony Express might not have been the long-term solution everyone hoped for, it symbolized the tenacity of a country on the brink of modernity. It was a thrilling, albeit brief, chapter in the saga of American communication, a tale of speed, endurance, and the relentless pursuit of progress. A reminder that even the wildest dreams can gallop into reality, if only for a short, breathtaking ride. As we close this chapter, let's keep our eyes peeled for what comes next, because the story of mail in America is far from over. As we wave goodbye to the dust kicked up by the Pony Express, the era of iron horses was galloping into the spotlight. Picture the late 1800, a time when America decided that the best way to deal with its immense size was to slap some steel tracks across it and call it a day. Enter the Transcontinental Railroad, the game-changer that was about to turn the Pony Express into a quaint memory and make sending a letter as efficient as a well-oiled machine. Now, if you thought the Pony Express was ambitious, the Transcontinental Railroad was the audacious cousin that showed up to family gatherings with a megaphone and a blueprint. This was no small endeavor. We're talking about a project that stretched over 900 miles from Omaha, Nebraska, to Sacramento, California, and it didn't just happen overnight. It took years of political wrangling, economic calculations, and a lot of backbreaking labor to lay those tracks. The big players in this iron saga, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroad companies. These two were like the yin and yang of 19th-century railroading, starting construction from opposite sides of the country and aiming to meet somewhere in the middle. Spoiler alert, they nailed it in Promontory Summit, Utah, on May 10, 1869, with a ceremonial golden spike, which, let's be honest, was more about showmanship than practicality. But hey, if you're going to connect a nation, you might as well do it with a bit of flair. Now, let's talk numbers, because this is where things get really interesting. Before the railroad, mail delivery was a slow and costly affair. Remember when a letter from New York to San Francisco could take weeks and cost you a small fortune? With the railroad, that time shrank down to under 10 days, and costs plummeted. Suddenly, sending a letter wasn't a luxury, it was accessible, and it was fast. Postage rates dropped significantly, making communication across the continent not just a possibility but a norm. This wasn't just about letters, though. The railroad was like a superhighway for the economy, turbocharging the movement of goods and people. Imagine the excitement. Farmers in the Midwest could ship their corn to California, or a businessman in San Francisco could send a crate of oranges to New York City. The possibilities were endless. For the first time, America was truly interconnected, and the economic boom was palpable. The railroad didn't just transport goods, it transported prosperity. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous side of this iron revolution. The construction of the railroad was no small feat, and it certainly wasn't a walk in the park for those who built it. Thousands of workers, many of them Chinese immigrants on the Central Pacific side and Irish immigrants on the Union Pacific side, toiled in grueling conditions. They faced harsh weather, treacherous terrain, and dangerous work environments, all for a few dollars a day. It was a far cry from the Golden Spike ceremony, but their sweat and sacrifice laid the foundation for modern America. And let's not forget the political machinations behind this steel marvel. The Pacific Railway Acts, spearheaded by President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, were a masterclass in legislative maneuvering. These acts offered land grants and loans to railroad companies, incentivizing them to tackle this monumental task. The government was essentially saying, build it, and we'll make it worth your while. It was a deal too sweet to pass up, and it set the stage for a transportation revolution. Yet, as with all grand tales, there was a darker underbelly. The railroad companies were not above cutting corners or engaging in some good old-fashioned corruption. The Credit Mobilier scandal of 1872 exposed how officials in the Union Pacific created a sham construction company to skim off profits, a scandal that reached all the way to Congress. It was a reminder that while the railroad was a triumph of engineering, it was also a breeding ground for greed and graft. So, what did all this mean for society? Well, for one, It shrank the country in ways that were previously unimaginable. People could now travel across the continent in a matter of days rather than months. It was the era of manifest destiny, and the railroad was the chariot that carried it forward. Towns sprang up along the tracks, and the West was opened up for settlement and development, for better or for worse. The cultural and economic landscape was forever altered, and the railroad was at the heart of it all. Despite the romanticized vision of the railroad as a symbol of progress, it's important to remember the costs. The Native American populations, who had called the land home for generations, found themselves displaced as the iron tracks cut through their territories. The ecological impact was significant too, as the vast landscapes were transformed to accommodate this new age of transportation. It was progress at a price, a testament to the complexities of modernization. In the end, the Transcontinental Railroad was a marvel of its time, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. It connected a nation, changed the way people lived and communicated, and laid the groundwork for the America we know today. Yet, it also served as a reminder of the costs of progress, the labor, the corruption, and the cultural upheaval that accompanied it. It was a symbol of both triumph and toil, a dichotomy that continues to resonate in our modern world. As we steam ahead, keep your seats and tray tables upright, because the story of mail and communication in America is still unfolding. With the railroad now in place, the stage was set for even more innovations that would continue to reshape how people connected across distances. The world was getting smaller, faster, and more interconnected, and the next chapter promised to be just as thrilling. Stay tuned, because we're just getting started. Now that we've laid down those railroad tracks, let's hitch a ride on the lightning-fast telegraph, the 19th century equivalent of upgrading your dial-up to fiber optic. You see, while the railroad was busy flattening the country like a pancake, the telegraph was zipping messages across it faster than you can say, "Stop the presses." In 1844, Samuel Morse sent the first official telegraph message from Washington, D.C., to Baltimore, forever changing the way we communicated. And boy, was this a game-changer. Let's set the scene. It's the mid-1800, and America is catching telegraph fever. By 1861, you could send a message coast to coast thanks to the completion of the first transcontinental telegraph line. This was the internet of its time, folks, a breakthrough that made the Pony Express look like a quaint memory and sent the railroad a memo saying, "You've got competition." But unlike a horse, the telegraph didn't need oats or a stable, just some wires and a bit of electrical current. The telegraph was more than just a technological marvel. It was an equalizer, leveling the playing field of communication. Suddenly, businesses could close deals from thousands of miles away, and newspapers could report on events as they happened. This was Twitter before Twitter, only with fewer cat memes and more Morse code. Political campaigns reaped the benefits too. Candidates could spread their messages faster and further, a precursor to the social media blitzes we see today. Abraham Lincoln, for instance, was the first president to use the telegraph extensively during the Civil War, directing military operations as if he were playing a high-stakes game of Risk. But let's not be too starry-eyed here. The telegraph had its share of growing pains. For one, there was the small issue of learning Morse code, a skill that made typing on a smartphone keyboard look like child's play. Then there were the wires, which needed to be strung across vast distances, often falling victim to weather, wildlife, or the occasional grumpy farmer who didn't like his fields being used as a tech corridor. And let's not forget the telegraph operators, the unsung heroes who spent their days decoding darts and dashes into something resembling human speech. Now, as the telegraph rewired the nation, it also rewired the world of crime. Yes, folks, crooks have always been early adopters of technology. Telegraph lines became the target of saboteurs and thieves who realized that cutting a wire could sever communication faster than you can say, "crime of the century." In a twist of irony, the telegraph also helped catch these criminals. Law enforcement could send descriptions of fugitives across state lines in minutes, turning the nation into a giant wanted poster. By 1872, the Postal Act was signed into law, further democratizing communication in America. This act turned the postal system into a true public service, making mail delivery more accessible and affordable for everyone. It was like offering free Wi-Fi on a national scale. The Postal Act also sought to clamp down on mail scams and fraud, which were as rampant then as spam emails are today. The government was saying, "We want everyone to communicate, but let's keep it above board, shall we?" The changes ushered in by the Telegraph and the Postal Act had profound social implications. Families could stay in touch more easily, businesses could expand their reach, and political movements could galvanize support with unprecedented speed. It was a time when the phrase, "the world is getting smaller," started to hold real meaning. The Telegraph and the Postal Act were the harbingers of a connected world, laying the groundwork for the communication networks we take for granted today. Yet, despite the Telegraph's triumphs, there were those who mourned the loss of slower, more deliberate forms of communication. Letter writing, once an art form, began to decline as people opted for the speed of Morse code over the elegance of the written word. It was the 19th century equivalent of trading a handcrafted letter for an email full of typos. The telegraph was a marvel, yes, but it also marked the beginning of our obsession with speed over substance. In the grand tapestry of history, the telegraph was a thread that wove together disparate parts of a sprawling nation, binding them with invisible lines of communication. It connected people in ways they'd never been connected before, shrinking the vast American landscape into something more manageable. And while we can laugh at the idea of sending messages in darts and dashes, we should also recognize the telegraph as a pivotal moment in our collective journey toward modernity. As we pause to catch our breath, let's remember that the story is far from over. The telegraph may have been revolutionary, but it was just one chapter in the epic tale of American communication. With every dart and dash, we were inching closer to a future that promised even more remarkable innovations. So, as we prepare to dive into the next chapter, keep your eyes peeled and your ears open, because the ride is about to get even wilder. If we peek over the horizon of history, we see a world on the cusp of a communication revolution, thanks to that little wonder called the telegraph. But let's take a moment to appreciate the profound ripple effect this innovation had on society at large. We're not just talking about a nifty gadget that sent darts and dashes. We're talking about the dawn of an era where information moved faster than the fastest horse or steam train. It was a bit like replacing smoke signals with instant messaging. Suddenly, distance was no longer the dictator of news speed. By the late 1800s, the telegraph had already begun to transform the very fabric of daily life. Businesses were the early adopters, using their newfound ability to send rapid-fire updates to streamline operations and outmaneuver competitors. This was capitalism with a caffeine boost, and the effects were seismic. Even the stock market got a facelift, as brokers could now receive real-time information. Gone were the days of relying on yesterday's news to make today's decisions. It was a brave new world where fortunes could be made or lost faster than you could say Morse code. But let's not overlook the human side of the story. Families, once separated by vast distances and weeks of silence, could now maintain a thread of connection. A quick telegram could deliver everything from mundane updates to life-changing news. Imagine receiving a marriage proposal via telegraph, romantic or cold. That's up for debate, but it certainly made for efficient planning. In the 19th century, the telegraph was the closest thing to telepathy. Yet, as with any great leap forward, there were growing pains. Telegraph operators, those unsung heroes, were the human routers of their day, translating darts and dashes into coherent messages. They were the guardians of privacy and the potential snoops of their time, privy to the secrets of strangers and governments alike. The telegraph office was a hub of intrigue, where whispers could become headlines and rumors could spark revolutions. Speaking of revolutions, let's not forget how the telegraph played a pivotal role in wartime communications. During the American Civil War, it was the Union's secret weapon, allowing President Lincoln and his generals to coordinate troop movements with unprecedented speed. It was like having a command center that stretched across states, a far cry from the smoke signals of yore. But with great power came great responsibility and the occasional security breach. Intercepted messages could turn the tide of battle, proving that every technological advance comes with its Achilles heel. As we fast forward to the dawn of the 20th century, the telegraph's impact was undeniable, but change was afoot. Enter the telephone, the telegraph's younger, chattier sibling, which took the world by storm with Alexander Graham Bell's 1876 invention. Suddenly, you could hear the voice of a loved one across the miles, a marvel that made the telegraph seem like a silent film in a world hungry for talkies. The novelty of hearing a human voice rendered the telegraph's darts and dashes almost quaint, like trading in a typewriter for a word processor. The telephone's rise was meteoric, and by the early 1900s, it was as much a fixture in American households as the family Bible. It turned communication into a two-way street, allowing for conversations that were as immediate as they were intimate. The economy, ever the opportunist, pounced on this new tool, and customer service was born. Businesses could now handle customer queries in real time, a concept that must have seemed like witchcraft at the time. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The telephone wasn't without its quirks. Early phone calls were often a community affair, thanks to party lines that let everyone in on your conversations. Privacy was as scarce as a gold nugget in a pan, and one had to be careful with words. Imagine discussing Aunt Edna's scandalous elopement only to realize half the town was eavesdropping. Those party lines were the social media of their day, minus the cat videos. By the mid-20th century, the communication landscape was shifting yet again. Enter television, the visual juggernaut that brought the world into our living rooms. News, entertainment, and advertising all found a new home on the small screen, turning the family room into a mini-cinema. Information was no longer just heard or read. It was seen, bringing with it a new level of engagement, and let's be honest, a new level of distraction. The TV era was all about spectacle, but it also had its dark side. It turned news into a ratings game, and the line between information and entertainment blurred like a watercolor in the rain. It was a double-edged sword, offering a front-row seat to world events while also turning us into passive spectators. And yet, it was undeniably influential, shaping public opinion with a power that previous generations could only dream of. As we leap into the late 20th century, the digital age dawns with the Internet, an invention that made all previous communication advances look like stepping stones. Suddenly, the world was at our fingertips, and communication became as easy as a click of a mouse. Email replaced letters, chat rooms replaced phone calls, and social media became the new town square. We were entering an era where information was both infinite and instantaneous, a double-edged sword if ever there was one. The Internet was a revolution that made telegrams and phone calls seem almost antique. It democratized information, giving a voice to anyone with a Wi-Fi connection. It also spawned a new breed of misinformation, turning the digital landscape into a minefield of fake news and viral hoaxes. The Internet brought people together while simultaneously pulling them apart, a paradox that continues to challenge us today. As we look back at the journey from horse-drawn mail to fiber optics, it's clear that each leap forward was both a triumph and a trial. Communication has always been about connection, but it's also been about control, of information, of narratives, and of power. Every innovation has brought with it opportunities and obstacles, a reminder that progress is never without its price. So, what can we learn from this whirlwind tour of communication history? Perhaps it's that every age has its own version of the Pony Express, an ambitious attempt to bridge distances and connect people, however imperfectly. Whether it's a fleet of riders, a line of telegraph poles, or a network of satellites, the goal has always been the same: to shrink the world and expand our reach. As we navigate the complexities of today's digital age, it's worth remembering that we've been here before, in one form or another. The tools may change, but the human desire to connect, to communicate, and to be heard remains a constant. And while it's easy to romanticize the past or fret about the future, the truth is that we're all part of an ongoing story, a story that began with a simple message and continues to unfold with every new innovation. So, as you send your next text or post your next tweet, take a moment to appreciate the journey that brought us here. From the galloping horses of the Pony Express to the high-speed data of today, it's been a wild ride. And who knows what the next chapter holds? One thing's for sure, it'll be worth the wait. In the grand theatre of history, the Gupta Empire struts onto the stage around 320 CE, and spoiler alert, it's not just another episode of medieval dynasty drama. Picture a world where India is the ultimate cultural hotspot, serving up more flair than a Bollywood awards show. At the helm is Chandragupta I, a monarch with grand designs, and apparently a knack for strategic matchmaking that would make any reality TV producer proud. Chandragupta I is the man of the hour, stepping into the spotlight as the founder of the Gupta Empire. Now, before you start picturing him as some lone warrior king galloping across the plains, let's shatter that romanticized image. Chandragupta I wasn't just swinging swords. He was playing a game of political chess, and he had some pretty ambitious moves up his sleeve. Around 320 CE, he took the throne, and with it, the ambitious task of unifying the northern territories of India. And how did he do it? Well, not with a sword, but with a ring. Yes, marriage alliances, the ancient world's version of linked-in connections, were key to his strategy. Chandragupta I married Kumaradvi, a princess of the Lichchavi tribe, which, in today's terms, was like merging two megacorporations. This strategic union wasn't just a love story for the ages. It was a power move that expanded his influence and resources, setting the stage for an empire that would span vast swaths of the Indian subcontinent. It's almost like watching a historical rom-com where the stakes are land acquisition and military alliances. And the empire, it wasn't built on love alone. Economic prosperity followed Chandragupta's reign like a golden shadow. The Gupta administration was busy minting coins, quite literally, as their currency started circulating far and wide. This wasn't just any loose change. These coins were statements of power, embossed with the images of kings and guards, designed to remind everyone who's boss. The economy was booming, trade routes were bustling, and wealth was pouring in faster than a Gupta-era chariot in a Ben-Hur-style race. But let's not get all misty-eyed about this golden age. While the Guptas were indeed enjoying their wealth, they weren't just lounging in palatial gardens sipping soma. No, they were masters of ancient PR, crafting a narrative that made the empire seem like a utopia of prosperity and peace. The truth was a bit more nuanced. Sure, the Sanskrit epics and scientific texts flourished, but let's not forget the clever diplomacy and canny bureaucratic moves that kept things running smoothly. Speaking of diplomacy, the Guptas knew their way around a diplomatic scroll or two. These guys could charm the sandals off any envoy from a neighboring kingdom. The secret sauce. A mix of generous gifts, strategic marriages, and occasionally a little flexing of military muscle. After all, even the friendliest of gestures sometimes needed the backing of a formidable army. The Gupta kings had a reputation for being patrons of the arts and sciences, and they used this to their advantage, wooing scholars, artists, and mathematicians to their court like rock stars on a world tour. As the empire expanded, the Guptas cemented their hold over the Indian subcontinent, stretching their influence from the fertile plains of the Ganges to the bustling trade routes of the south. This wasn't just about territory, it was about control. Control of resources, trade routes, and perhaps most importantly, the narrative of power. In a world where information was as valuable as gold, being the one who told the story was as crucial as having the army to back it up. Let's not forget the Gupta style of governance, which was as much about public perception as it was about policy. Decentralization was the name of the game. They allowed local leaders to maintain a degree of autonomy while ensuring allegiance to the central authority. It was a clever balancing act that kept the empire stable and its coffers full. This administrative finesse didn't just come out of nowhere. It was a calculated approach to rule, combining the carrot and stick method with a generous portion of cultural patronage. And what about the common folk, you ask? Well, they were busy reaping the benefits of an empire that was, at least on the surface, thriving. Trade was booming, cities were expanding, and art and culture were reaching new heights. But beneath this veneer of prosperity, there was the ever-present reality of an empire that needed constant management to prevent it from fracturing under its own weight. In short, the rise of the Gupta Empire was as much about savvy political maneuvers and economic acumen as it was about the charismatic leaders who sat on its throne. It was a time of great achievement and grand vision. Just remember that behind every grand empire is a tapestry of complex stories, alliances, and of course, the occasional strategic marriage. So, as we continue to unravel the saga of the Guptas, keep in mind that history is never as simple as it seems. Stay tuned, because the plot, as they say, is only going to thicken. And so, we delve deeper into the golden age of the Gupta Empire, where the plot thickens under the rule of Samudragupta, often dubbed the Napoleon of India. Now, if you're picturing an Indian emperor with a penchant for bicorn hats and hand-in-jacket poses, hold that thought. Samudragupta wasn't just about conquests. He was the full package: warrior, patron of the arts, and yes, even a bit of a poet. This guy had more layers than a millfuel pastry, and his reign was as rich as the syrupy layers of history he left behind. Taking the reins from his father, Chandragupta I, around 335 CE, Samudragupta embarked on a campaign that would make any military strategist drool. With territory expansion as his mantra, he went on over 50 military campaigns, conquering regions like a game of Risk on steroids. From the Ganges plains to the southern tip of the subcontinent, Samudragupta stitched together a patchwork quilt of lands, each conquest bolstering the empire's grandeur. But let's debunk a myth straight away. This wasn't a peaceful handover of keys from local rulers. No, it was more like a series of forceful eviction notices delivered by the mighty Gupta army. Yet, his charm offensive wasn't just about swords and shields. Samudragupta often reinstated defeated kings as his vassals, a move that was both clever and pragmatic, ensuring loyalty without the pesky business of direct governance. This strategy was not just innovative for its time, but also a testament to the emperor's understanding of power dynamics and human nature. Now, you might think that with all this military action, the empire was a grim place, full of war cries and clashing swords. But here comes the twist. Samudragupta was a Renaissance man before it was cool. His reign saw a cultural renaissance that transformed the Gupta Empire into a hub of artistic and scientific innovation. Picture this: a court where poets and scholars mingled with warriors, where the arts weren't just encouraged, but celebrated with the pomp of a royal gala. It was a time when Sanskrit literature flourished, producing classics that would be read for centuries. Inscriptions from this era, like the Allahabad pillar, not only boast his conquests, but also his patronage of the arts, reflecting a ruler who understood the power of cultural soft diplomacy. But let's zoom in on one of the shining stars of this era, Aryabhata. A mathematician and astronomer extraordinaire, Aryabhata was the Gupta Empire's answer to Copernicus, albeit a millennium earlier. Around 499 CE, he penned the Aryabhatiya, a compendium of astronomical and mathematical lore that would put your high school algebra book to shame. He accurately calculated the length of the solar year to 365, 358 days, just a hair off the modern value. This was a time when people still thought the Earth was the center of the universe, yet Aryabhata had the audacity to suggest that the Earth rotated on its axis. Talk about thinking outside the celestial box. Aryabhata's work wasn't just academic noodling, it had real-world applications, influencing calendar reforms and navigation. His introduction of the concept of zero was a revolutionary leap that propelled mathematics light-years ahead. Imagine a world without zero. No binary code, no computers, no late-night doom-scrolling on your smartphone. We've got Aryabhata in part to thank for that little bit of modern existential angst. Now, let's pivot from the stars to terra firma and talk economics. The Gupta Empire wasn't just a cultural titan, it was an economic powerhouse, thanks to Samudragupta's savvy policies. Trade routes crisscrossed the empire like a web of prosperity, connecting it to the wider world. Silk from China, spices from Southeast Asia, and gold from the Roman Empire flowed through the Gupta hands like a well-oiled machine. We're talking about a trade network that spanned thousands of miles, making Marco Polo's adventures look like a weekend road trip. The Guptas were nothing if not strategic about their economic policies. They standardized weights and measures, a move that might seem dull but was crucial for facilitating trade. Imagine trying to trade without a consistent measure of value. Chaos would ensue faster than you could say buyer's remorse. They also minted a dazzling array of coins, not just for financial transactions, but as a tool of state propaganda. Each coin was a mini billboard, showcasing the emperor's face and achievements, reminding everyone of the strength and stability of the empire. But before we get swept away by the romance of a bustling marketplace, let's not forget the harsh realities. The empire's wealth was built on the backs of a vast peasantry, toiling away in fields that fed both the empire's coffers and its citizens. Taxation funded the grandeur, and while it wasn't exactly a feudal dystopia, let's just say the Guptas knew how to squeeze revenue from their subjects. This prosperity was a double-edged sword, as the very systems that fueled the empire's rise also sowed the seeds of later discontent. As we wrap up this chapter in the saga of the Gupta Empire, keep an eye on the bigger picture. Samudragupta's reign, with its blend of military might and cultural patronage, set the stage for a legacy that will be both celebrated and scrutinized by historians. The empire at its zenith was a marvel of its time, a blend of innovation, power, and art that continues to captivate our imaginations. But remember, the story is far from over. The Golden Age was not eternal, and the forces that built this empire were already planting the seeds of its eventual decline. Stay tuned, because what goes up must, inevitably, come down. As the Gupta Empire basks in its so-called Golden Age, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of what really greased the wheels of this ancient powerhouse. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all silk and spices. Underneath the shimmering veneer of prosperity lay a complex web of societal structures, political maneuvering, and yes, some good old-fashioned bureaucracy. It's time to lift the curtain on this historical stage to reveal the unsung heroes and the not-so-glamorous realities of Gupta governance. First up, let's tackle the caste system, the social framework that would make any modern HR manager's head spin. The Guptas didn't invent the caste system, but they certainly played it like a maestro conducting a symphony of inequality. While the empire is often romanticized as a unified utopia, the reality was more like a patchwork quilt, each piece distinct, yet part of a larger, complicated design. The caste hierarchy was rigid, with the Brahmins, priests, and scholars at the top, followed by the Kshatriyas, warriors, Vaishyas, traders, and Shudras, laborers. Below these tiers were the untouchables, a group who weren't invited to the party, but still had to clean up after it. And while we're on the subject of parties, let's not forget the real social climbers, the bureaucrats. The Gupta administration was a well-oiled machine, and it needed an army of clerks, scribes, and officials to keep it running smoothly. Picture a Roman Senate meeting, but with more Sanskrit and less toga. The bureaucracy was the empire's backbone, ensuring that taxes were collected, laws were enforced, and grain was distributed. It was this administrative prowess that allowed the Guptas to maintain control over such a vast territory. The trick was decentralization. Local leaders were given autonomy, provided they pledged allegiance to the emperor. It was like outsourcing, but instead of tech support, they were managing entire provinces. But let's not pretend it was all sunshine and lotus flowers. The bureaucracy could be as cumbersome as an elephant in a pottery shop, and corruption was as common as monsoon rains. Bribes and favoritism greased the wheels of governance, and officials who were supposed to be bastions of justice sometimes acted more like medieval mob bosses. Still, despite these flaws, the administration was remarkably effective, a testament to the Guptas' strategic genius. Now, let's talk about the ladies, because gender roles in the Gupta Empire were a whole different kettle of fish. Women were often relegated to the sidelines, their roles largely confined to the domestic sphere. While there were exceptions, like the learned poetess Avantisandari, most women found their destinies tied to marriage and motherhood. The ideal Gupta woman was the quintessential supporting actress, her life a testament to virtues such as fidelity and modesty. But let's not gloss over the less savory aspects. Child marriages were common, and women's rights were, let's just say, not exactly a priority. Yet the narrative isn't entirely bleak. Historical texts like the Kama Sutra, penned by Vatsyayana during this period, suggest that women did have some agency, at least in the realm of romance and relationships. It's a tantalizing glimpse into a world where love wasn't just a transaction, but a nuanced interplay of attraction and intellect. However, let's not kid ourselves. These freedoms were limited, and while men elaborated on the art of love, women often found themselves as chess pieces in the grand game of dynastic politics. In short, the Golden Age was gilded, not solid gold. The Guptas' brilliance lay in their ability to craft a narrative of prosperity and peace, even if the reality was far more complex. They were masters of spin, and their legacy is a testament to the power of a good story. As we peel back the layers of this historical onion, we find a society that was as sophisticated as it was stratified, with politics as intricate as a game of three-dimensional chess. So, what's the takeaway from this ancient soap opera? Perhaps it's that the Guptas, like all empires, were a product of their time, a time when power was as much about perception as it was about swords and coins. Their story is a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition, creativity, and yes, the occasional bureaucratic snafu. As we continue our journey through the annals of Gupta history, remember that the past is a foreign country, and sometimes it's the small, unglamorous details that tell the most compelling tales. Stay tuned, because there's more to this epic saga than meets the eye. As we leave behind the glittering facade of the Gupta Empire's so-called Golden Age, let's peel back the layers and venture into the shadows where cracks are starting to appear, and not just in the frescoes. Picture this. An empire that once danced on the world stage is now stumbling, a bit like a Bollywood star with two left feet. It's the beginning of the end, folks, and the Guptas are about to learn that even the most dazzling dynasty can't escape the unrelenting march of time, or the Huns. First, let's talk about the Huns. No, not Attila and his merry band of marauders, but their cousins over in Central Asia. Around the 5th century CE, these Hunas, as they were known in India, decided to crash the Gupta party. And by crash, I mean they stormed through the northwest regions of the empire like an uninvited guest who didn't just drink all your beer, but also set your house on fire. The Gupta military, once the pride of the empire, found themselves outmatched and outmaneuvered. This wasn't the kind of strategic brilliance we'd seen in the empire's heyday. It was more like a comedy of errors, minus the laughs. Here's where the narrative gets juicy. The Guptas, accustomed to flexing their muscles through showy parades and grandiose displays, were caught off guard by the Huns' guerrilla tactics. Think of it as a medieval reality check. The empire's traditional warfare methods were about as effective as a sword in a gunfight. The Huns were nimble, relentless, and had a penchant for psychological warfare, leaving a trail of destruction that the Gupta forces simply couldn't contain. The resulting battles were less about glorious victories and more about damage control, a harsh reality for an empire used to calling the shots. But before we paint the Guptas as entirely hapless, let's consider the economic backdrop. By the time the Huns rolled in, the empire's coffers weren't exactly jingling with coins. Trade routes that had once been bustling with the clamor of merchants and the aroma of exotic spices were now eerily quiet, akin to a marketplace after closing time. The Silk Road, that ancient highway of wealth, was disrupted by political instability and increased bandit activity. Suddenly, the Gupta treasury was looking more like a piggy bank after a particularly enthusiastic raid by a kid saving for a new toy. And speaking of toys, the Gupta leadership had a bit of a spending problem. Grand temples, elaborate ceremonies, and yes, even a few too many statues commemorating their own greatness drained resources faster than you could say fiscal responsibility. Meanwhile, the peasants, those unsung heroes of any economy, were left carrying the tax burden. The strain on agricultural production, coupled with the ever-present threat of drought, meant that the empire was teetering precariously on the brink of an economic downturn. Now, let's pivot to the internal strife that was bubbling under the surface like a poorly contained cauldron of political discord. The Gupta Empire, once a masterclass in decentralized governance, found itself grappling with the very autonomy it had so cleverly wielded. Local rulers, once loyal vassals, began to see the writing on the wall, or perhaps the lack of it, given the declining state of literacy and scholarship as funds dried up. These regional powerhouses started to question their allegiance, a bit like employees eyeing the competition when their company's stock prices start to tumble. And here's the kicker. Environmental factors, those pesky elements that empires so often overlook, were doing their bit to stir the pot. Deforestation and overfarming had depleted the land, turning fertile fields into barren plains. It was a classic case of too much, too soon, with the Guptas having overextended their empire's resources like a college student maxing out a credit card. The result? A perfect storm of ecological and economic woes, leaving the empire vulnerable to both internal and external threats. But let's not forget the human element, because what's an empire without its people? The Gupta rulers, ensconced in their ivory towers, seemed increasingly out of touch with the populace. Caste system, which had kept society ticking along like a well-oiled machine, began to show signs of wear. Discontent simmered among the lower classes, who bore the brunt of the economic downturn and the Huns' invasions. Meanwhile, The Brahmins, those erstwhile gatekeepers of knowledge, found their influence waning as the empire's cultural patronage dwindled. So, what's the takeaway from this cavalcade of chaos? Perhaps it's that even the mightiest empires can fall victim to hubris, a lack of foresight, and a refusal to adapt to changing times. The Guptas, for all their brilliance, struggled to reconcile their glorious past with a rapidly evolving present. As the empire fragmented, it became a patchwork of warring states, each vying for control in a landscape that was as hostile as it was unpredictable. Stay tuned, because the story of the Guptas is far from over. While their decline may seem inevitable in hindsight, the lessons we can glean from their rise and fall are as relevant today as they were over a millennium ago. In the next chapter, we'll continue to unravel the threads of this historical tapestry, exploring the legacy of an empire that, despite its downfall, continues to capture our imagination. Buckle up, because history, much like the Huns, waits for no one. As the Gupta Empire's sun began to set, its shadows stretched far and wide, leaving behind a legacy more enduring than any stone monument. Let's dig into the meat and bones of what this empire left behind. And spoiler alert, it's a mixed bag of glittering gems and a few questionable souvenirs. When it comes to lasting impact, the Guptas did leave us with more than just a cautionary tale about overextending your empire like a college kid with a credit card. For starters, their contributions to science and mathematics weren't just footnotes in history. They were more like the building blocks of future civilizations. Aryabhata, the OG of ancient Indian mathematics, came up with the concept of zero. Zero. Just imagine a world without it. No calculus, no computer code, and most tragically, no ability to calculate just how much we overspend on takeout. The ripple effects of his work were felt far beyond the borders of his homeland, influencing Islamic scholars in Baghdad and eventually European mathematicians during the Renaissance. But the Guptas didn't stop at numbers. Their artistic achievements were like the Instagram influencers of their day, setting trends that everyone else wanted to follow. From intricate sculptures to the golden age of Sanskrit literature, they were the cultural tastemakers of the ancient world. Even today, Indian classical art and literature owe a tip of the hat to the Guptas for laying the groundwork that would inspire artists and writers for centuries. Now, let's not get too starry-eyed about this so-called golden age. The Guptas were no strangers to the art of spin, and they knew how to craft a narrative that shone brighter than a gold coin fresh from the mint. Sure, they painted a rosy picture of peace and prosperity, but behind the curtain was a society rife with inequality, where the caste system held sway like an unyielding puppeteer. The empire's administration might have been an impressive feat of logistics, but it was also a masterclass in maintaining power through hierarchy and tradition, tools that ensured stability at the cost of social mobility. The allure of a golden age is as potent as ever, and let's face it, who doesn't love a good fairy tale? Yet, the romanticized notion of the Guptas as benevolent rulers overseeing a utopian society is more myth than reality. In truth, their reign was a delicate balancing act, maintaining control over a vast and diverse population through a combination of cultural patronage and political acumen. It's a testament to the enduring power of a good PR campaign that we remember them for their achievements rather than their missteps. As for the modern parallels, well, they practically write themselves. The Gupta's tale is a lesson in the dangers of hubris and the necessity of adaptability. Their failure to modernize their military tactics in the face of new threats is a classic example of what happens when innovation takes a backseat to tradition. And their economic challenges, exacerbated by environmental neglect and unequal wealth distribution, sound eerily familiar in today's world. The empire's decline is a reminder that even the most powerful civilizations are vulnerable to the whims of nature and the complexities of human behavior. In an age where global interconnectedness and technological advancements shape our reality, the Gupta's story offers a poignant reminder of the importance of foresight and flexibility. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring impact of cultural and scientific achievements, but it's also a warning of the pitfalls of complacency and the dangers of resting on laurels. In the end, the Gupta Empire left behind a tapestry of history woven with triumphs and tribulations. Their story, a blend of myth and reality, continues to captivate our imaginations and challenge our understanding of what it means to govern, create, and innovate. So here we are, centuries later, still unraveling their legacy, still learning from their successes and failures, and still striving to understand the complexities of human societies. As we close the book on the Guptas, let's take a moment to reflect on their contributions and the lessons they imparted. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past is never truly past, and the echoes of ancient empires continue to resonate in our world today. In the 14th century, Italy was a roller coaster of chaos, famine, and disease, with a sprinkle of artistic flair waiting patiently in the wings. Picture Europe as the ultimate medieval reality show, where a third of the cast didn't make it past the first season, thanks to the Black Death's merciless sweep. But here's the kicker. This pestilence was the unlikely catalyst for the Renaissance, a period that would redefine art, culture, and society. Who would have thought that a pandemic could open doors to a cultural rebirth? Talk about silver linings in a very dark cloud. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how this all happened. Back in the 14th century, Europe was less happily ever after and more grim fairy tale. The population was booming, but resources were stretched thinner than a medieval minstrel's lute string. Then came the Black Death, which swept across the continent like an unwelcome guest who overstays their visit, but also redecorates your entire house. It killed an estimated 25 million people in Europe alone, and Italy, being a major trade hub, was hit particularly hard. Cities like Florence lost up to 60% of their population. Yeah, it was as grim as it sounds. But here's the twist. The post-plague world saw opportunities for those who survived. With fewer mouths to feed, suddenly there was more of everything to go around: land, jobs, resources. Wages rose because labor was in short supply, and suddenly the surviving peasants found themselves with a bit of financial muscle. Imagine that, peasants with bargaining power. The economic shift was as revolutionary as a smartphone in a rotary phone world. And speaking of revolutions, let's talk about the wool trade. You might not think of wool as a cultural catalyst, but in medieval Italy, it was the equivalent of striking oil. The wool trade turned Florence into a bustling metropolis. Wealthy merchants, flush with cash from selling those snugly woolen goods, became the patrons of the arts. They were like the venture capitalists of the Renaissance, funding artists who would go on to paint, sculpt, and build the world anew. Florence, with its strategic position and booming economy, became a magnet for talent. Artists, thinkers, and scholars flocked there like moths to a flame. The Medici family, who practically invented the concept of old money, were at the helm, using their vast wealth to support artists like Botticelli and Michelangelo. They were the opera of their time, shouting, "You get a commission, and you get a commission." But let's not romanticize it too much. While the Renaissance was a period of incredible artistic achievement, it also had its fair share of gritty realities. The streets of Florence were more like open sewers, and hygiene was, let's say, not a top priority. Bathing regularly was about as popular as leeches at a blood drive. Yet in this environment, artists created works that still captivate our imaginations today. The Renaissance didn't just pop up overnight. It was a slow burn, fueled by the wealth and social changes that followed the Black Death. The increased demand for luxury goods, art, and architecture was a direct result of the newfound wealth circulating in the economy. People weren't just surviving anymore, they were thriving, or at least trying to. This era of rebirth wasn't just about the art, though. It was also about the exchange of ideas. The rediscovery of classical texts sparked a revival in learning and education. Scholars began to challenge traditional ideas, questioning everything from the natural world to the heavens above. It was like the ultimate book club, except with more Latin and less wine. So, while the Black Death was undeniably a catastrophe, it set the stage for a cultural explosion that would change the course of history. The Renaissance was a complex tapestry of tragedy and triumph, woven together by the threads of survival, innovation, and creativity. And it all started in a time when a simple woolly sweater could change the world. And now, just as the dust from the wool trade was settling, let's meet the Medici family. Think of them as the ultimate Renaissance influencers, the Kardashians of their time, but with more Florentine flair and considerably more cultural cachet. If you thought your favorite tech mogul had spending power, wait till you hear how these Renaissance tycoons splashed their cash. We're talking about a family whose financial habits could make modern billionaires look like bargain hunters at a yard sale. The Medici were the OG bankers, a family whose name became synonymous with money and power in Florence. They didn't start wealthy, though. Giovanni di Bixi de Medici, the patriarch, was the one who laid the golden foundation. By the early 15th century, he had transformed a modest banking enterprise into a financial behemoth. Imagine walking into their bank as a medieval merchant seeking a loan. Giovanni would be there, not just weighing your gold, but also calculating the interest in his head, all while considering how he could leverage your debt to manipulate political outcomes. This was banking with strategy, folks. The wealth of the Medici didn't just sit in vaults gathering dust. Oh no, they had bigger plans. Cosimo de' Medici, Giovanni's son, took the family fortune and turned it into a cultural powerhouse. He was the great patron who funded many of the Renaissance's finest artists and thinkers. Forget about commissioning a local artist to paint your portrait. Cosimo was backing Leonardo da Vinci and Donatello. He practically had a golden ticket to the Renaissance's talent show. But why, you might ask, did Cosimo and his descendants pour so much of their wealth into art and science? Was it pure altruism, a love for beauty and knowledge? Hardly. The Medici were as politically savvy as they were wealthy. Patronage was a strategic move, a way to wield influence and maintain power in a city where politics was a blood sport. Painting frescoes and erecting sculptures wasn't just about beautifying Florence. It was about reinforcing the Medici brand, establishing their legacy as the de facto rulers of the city, even when they weren't officially in power. Let's not sugarcoat it. Florence during the Renaissance was no idyllic paradise. The Medici had to navigate a minefield of political rivalries and power plays. Take the Pazzi conspiracy of 1478, for instance, a plot to overthrow the Medici that could have been ripped from a medieval thriller. The conspiracy ended in chaos, with members of the rival Pazzi family literally hanging from the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio. It was a stark reminder that in Renaissance Florence, the line between art patronage and political maneuvering was thinner than a fresco's layer of paint. Now, here's where the myth-busting comes in. The Medici are often romanticized as benevolent overlords of the arts, the fairy godparents to struggling geniuses. And while they did fund some of the most iconic works of the Renaissance, it wasn't purely for the love of art. This was a high-stakes game of influence. Patronage was like a Renaissance LinkedIn. Commissioning the right artwork could elevate your status and secure your family's position for generations. Remember Lorenzo the Magnificent? They called him Il Magnifico for a reason. Under his reign, Florence became the epicenter of Renaissance culture. Lorenzo wasn't just a patron. He was a Renaissance man himself, dabbling in poetry, philosophy, and politics. His court was a who's who of geniuses: Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Botticelli. Imagine the intellectual energy in those rooms, the conversations that must have sparked over banquet tables laden with Renaissance fare, rich enough to feed both body and mind. Yet, despite their cultural contributions, the Medici were not immune to the pitfalls of power. Lorenzo's death in 1492 left a vacuum that led to Florence's brief experiment with a theocratic republic under the fiery preacher Savonarola. It was a time when bonfires of the vanities burned brightly, literally, as artworks and luxury items were torched in a puritanical frenzy. The Medici had to bide their time in exile before reclaiming their influence. The family's banking practices, too, weren't exactly squeaky clean. The Medici Bank, once the financial titan of Europe, eventually crumbled under the weight of bad loans and mismanagement. By the late 15th century, the bank was in decline, a shadow of its former self, proving that even the wealthiest families can fall prey to economic miscalculations. But let's not end on a downer. The Medici's legacy wasn't just financial ruin and political intrigue. Their patronage laid the groundwork for the Renaissance's cultural explosion. Without their investment in art and science, we might not have the masterpieces that continue to captivate us today. If Da Vinci's Mona Lisa still draws crowds, it's thanks in part to the Medici's vision. So, while the Medici's motives might have been tangled with ambition and power, their impact on the Renaissance was undeniable. They were the movers and shakers, the puppet masters behind the scenes, pulling strings to create a cultural legacy that outshone even their own financial empire. As for us, we're left with the art, the stories, and a whole lot of historical drama to appreciate. Stay tuned, because the Renaissance roller coaster is far from over. Now, as we dive headfirst into the artistic explosion of the Renaissance, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of artists like Michelangelo and Botticelli. These guys weren't just dabbling with paint and stone, they were redefining what it meant to be human. You see, the Renaissance wasn't just about slapping some paint on a canvas and calling it a day. Oh no, it was about capturing the very essence of humanity, with all its warts and wonders, and that took a level of skill and vision that still boggles the mind today. Take Michelangelo, for example. This guy was the ultimate workaholic. He was so dedicated to his craft that he once said, "If people knew how hard I worked to get my mastery, it wouldn't seem so wonderful at all." Talk about a humble brag. But let's give credit where it's due. His statue of David is a masterpiece of anatomical precision and artistic genius. Carved from a single block of marble, David stands at an impressive 17 feet tall. That's nearly 3 Shaquille O'Neals stacked on top of each other, and all of this from a guy who started sculpting this iconic piece when he was just 26 years old. Forget about a quarter-life crisis. Michelangelo was too busy chiseling away at history. But let's not gloss over the fact that Michelangelo's works were also a reflection of the society around him. David wasn't just a pretty face, or, in this case, a pretty everything. He was a symbol of the Republic of Florence, a testament to the city's strength and independence against the mightier states surrounding it. The statue was a political statement as much as it was an artistic one, reminding everyone that Florence, like David, could stand tall against any Goliath. Now, let's talk about Botticelli, the man who gave us The Birth of Venus. If you've ever seen this painting, you know it's like a Renaissance Instagram post, full of beauty, myth, and a touch of fantasy. But here's the twist. Botticelli's art wasn't just about pretty pictures. The Birth of Venus and other works were deeply rooted in the humanist philosophy that was sweeping through Italy. They reflected a renewed interest in classical antiquity and the potential of human achievement. While Venus floats serenely on her shell, she's also a nod to the intellectual and cultural rebirth that defined the era. And speaking of rebirth, let's bust the myth of the starving artist. The idea that these artists were toiling away in poverty, waiting for their genius to be recognized posthumously, is about as accurate as a Renaissance map of the world. Sure, some artists struggled, but the big names like Michelangelo and Botticelli were raking it in. Art commissions were the tech IPOs of the Renaissance. Michelangelo's contract for painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling was worth a cool 3,000 ducats, equivalent to over $500,000 today. Not bad for a ceiling job, right? These commissions were not just about money, though. They were about prestige and influence. Artists who secured commissions from powerful patrons like the Medici family or the Vatican were essentially set for life, both financially and socially. They were the celebrities of their time, the ones whose work would be remembered and revered for centuries. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The Renaissance had its own set of exclusions that make our modern sensibilities cringe. The concept of the Renaissance man, that mythical figure who excelled in art, science, and philosophy, was a bit of a boys' club. Women, by and large, were excluded from this cultural renaissance. Sure, there were exceptions like Artemisia Gentileschi, a trailblazing female painter who broke through the gender barriers, but she was more the exception than the rule, fighting tooth and nail for recognition in a male-dominated field. And let's not forget about class distinctions. The Renaissance was not a time of equal opportunity. If you were born into the wrong family, your chances of becoming the next Leonardo were about as likely as a snowstorm in Sicily. The era was deeply hierarchical, with opportunities largely reserved for those who had the right connections or the good fortune to catch the eye of a wealthy patron. So, while the Renaissance is often painted, pun intended, as a utopia of creativity and enlightenment, the reality was a bit more complex. It was a time of incredible achievements, yes, but also of significant exclusions and inequalities. The artists we celebrate today were the beneficiaries of a system that, for all its beauty, was rife with limitations. Yet despite these barriers, The art of the Renaissance continues to captivate us, transcending the very limitations of its time. It's a testament to the enduring power of creativity and the human spirit. So, as we dig deeper into this cultural explosion, let's keep our eyes open to the full picture, both the vibrant colors and the darker shades that make up the tapestry of history. And speaking of vibrant colors, stay tuned as we explore how the Renaissance wasn't just a feast for the eyes, but also a battleground of ideas and ideologies. From religious reformations to scientific revolutions, this was an era where the canvas of history was being painted anew, one brushstroke at a time. Ah, the Renaissance, a time when ideas were as explosive as a fireworks show, and intellectuals were the rock stars of their day. The humanist movement, in particular, like the backstage pass to this cerebral concert, where studying ancient texts became the ultimate hipster pastime. Forget avocado toast and kombucha. In Renaissance Italy, it was all about dusty manuscripts and the wisdom of the ancients. Now, before you roll your eyes at the thought of scholars poring over scrolls in dimly lit libraries, let's unpack why this was more than just academic navel-gazing. The humanists were on a mission to revive classical knowledge, believing these ancient texts held the key to living a virtuous and fulfilled life. They were the Indiana Joneses of their time, except they swapped whips for quills and treasure maps for Plato's dialogues. But this wasn't just about personal enlightenment. This revival influenced politics, education, and even religion. Imagine the intellectual scene of Florence as a bustling Renaissance cafe. But instead of discussing the latest TikTok trend, scholars were debating Aristotle's ethics and Cicero's rhetoric. The big idea here was ad fontes, or back to the sources. Humanists believed that to truly understand the present, you had to go back to the roots, the original texts, the ancient equivalent of refusing to watch the movie until you've read the book. They insisted on reading the classics in their original languages, which meant Latin became the intellectual high ground everyone wanted to scale. Yes, Latin, the original dead language that everyone loves to pretend to understand but secretly struggles with. It's like the Renaissance version of quoting Nietzsche to sound deep. And speaking of sound, the humanists were quite the disruptors. Much like the tech innovators of today, they challenged the status quo, pushing back against the rigid scholasticism that had dominated medieval universities. Scholasticism was like the academic version of dial-up internet, slow, methodical, and bound by a rigid structure. The humanists, on the other hand, were all about broadening horizons, encouraging the study of literature, history, and moral philosophy alongside traditional subjects. It was education too, zero people. But why did this intellectual awakening matter? Well, for starters, it laid the groundwork for a seismic shift in how people perceived themselves and the world. It wasn't just about memorizing facts. It was about developing critical thinking and an appreciation for the human experience. This intellectual curiosity trickled down into politics, where leaders like Niccolò Machiavelli drew on classical ideas to theorize about power and governance. Machiavelli's The Prince, written in 1513, might as well be the Renaissance equivalent of a political thriller, filled with sharp observations about power dynamics that still resonate today. In education, the humanist influence led to a more well-rounded curriculum, producing individuals who were not just specialists, but well-informed citizens. It was like crafting the original Renaissance man, capable of discussing philosophy one moment and critiquing art the next. Think of them as the polymaths of their day, minus the social media profiles and TED talks. Religion, too, wasn't immune to the humanist touch. This was an era when questioning the church could land you in hot water faster than you can say heresy. Yet, the humanists dared to critique religious texts and practices, laying the intellectual groundwork for reformers like Martin Luther. Luther's 95 Theses, nailed to the door of the Wittenberg Church in 1517, were a direct challenge to the Catholic Church's practices. It was a bold move that sparked the Protestant Reformation, a religious upheaval that changed the face of Europe. Now, you might be wondering if these scholarly pursuits were only for the elite, and you'd be right, sort of. While the upper echelons of society were the primary beneficiaries, the ideas of humanism slowly seeped into the broader culture. Schools and universities began to adopt new curricula, and the printing press, invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, made books more accessible than ever before. By the way, Gutenberg's press was the 15th century equivalent of the Internet, democratizing knowledge, and let's be honest, probably causing its fair share of misinformation too. Of course, let's not romanticize this as a utopia of intellectual equality. Access to education and these groundbreaking ideas was still a privilege, largely reserved for men of certain social standings. Women and the lower classes were often left on the sidelines, peering into the world of humanist thought like window shoppers at a luxury store. A few trailblazing women, such as Cassandra Fedel and Isara Nagarola, managed to break through the glass ceiling of academia, but they were exceptions in a patriarchal society that often dismissed their contributions. It's crucial to remember that the humanists weren't just bookworms holed up in libraries. They were actively engaged in the political and social issues of their time, advising rulers and influencing policy. This wasn't just a Renaissance book club. It was an ideological movement that sought to reshape society by revisiting the wisdom of the past. So, as we turn the pages of history, let's appreciate the humanists not just for their scholarly endeavors, but for their role in sparking a broader cultural transformation. They were the architects of a new intellectual landscape, one that encouraged curiosity, debate, and a relentless pursuit of knowledge. They weren't just preserving the past, they were using it as a springboard to leap into the future. Now, as we continue our journey through the Renaissance, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, where new ideas are constantly emerging, challenging, and redefining what it means to be human. Stay tuned, because this intellectual roller coaster is just getting started, and there's a lot more ground to cover. As we sail across the choppy intellectual seas of the Renaissance, it's time to drop anchor and assess the enduring legacy of this cultural juggernaut. Picture this: a time when art, science, and philosophy were as intertwined as earbuds in your pocket. The Renaissance was the ultimate mashup, where the best parts of humanity burst forth in a colorful explosion of creativity and ingenuity. But let's peel back the layers of fresco and marble to see what really stuck with us and what didn't. First off, let's talk about the art. The Renaissance gave us some of the most iconic pieces known to humanity: Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Michelangelo's David, and Raphael's School of Athens, all masterpieces that have been reproduced more times than cat memes. These works didn't just represent artistic skill, they were snapshots of a new way of thinking, a shift from the rigid medieval mindset to a world where human experience and emotion took center stage. It's like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone. Suddenly, you're connected to a broader, richer world. But while we're busy gushing over the beauty of Renaissance art, let's not forget the darker hues on this palette. The Renaissance was, in many ways, an exclusive club. The masterpieces we celebrate today were often commissioned by the wealthy for the wealthy. Art was a status symbol, like the Ferraris and Rolexes of its day. The average Florentine wasn't hanging a Botticelli in their living room. They were more concerned with keeping the plague at bay and affording their next meal. So while art flourished, it wasn't exactly democratized. It was a world where your access to beauty was dictated by your bank balance. Speaking of bank balances, let's chat about the economic landscape. The Renaissance was, in part, a financial revolution. Banking families like the Medici turned Florence into the Wall Street of the 15th century, innovating with credit systems and international transactions that laid the groundwork for modern finance. They were the Jeff Bezoses of their time, minus the space travel. Yet, for all the wealth generated, this economic boon was a double-edged sword. The influx of wealth exacerbated social divides, creating a chasm between the haves and the have-nots that would eventually spark conflict. Politically, the Renaissance was a chess game with real-life consequences. City-states like Florence, Venice, and Milan were the players, each maneuvering for power and influence. The Renaissance birthed Machiavelli's The Prince, a political treatise that still resonates with its pragmatic, if cynical, view of power. It's the original playbook for realpolitik, a reminder that behind the glitz of cultural rebirth, there was a gritty struggle for dominance. This political intrigue wasn't just for entertainment. It shaped the diplomatic landscape of Europe for centuries. Now, let's not gloss over the scientific advancements that emerged during this period. The Renaissance was the launchpad for the scientific revolution, where thinkers like Copernicus dared to challenge the geocentric model of the universe. Imagine the audacity. Suggesting the Earth wasn't the center of it all was akin to saying the Internet might not be the pinnacle of human achievement. These early scientists laid the groundwork for a future where questioning the status quo became the norm, a tradition that echoes in today's tech-driven world. Yet, for all its enlightenment, the Renaissance was not a time of universal progress. The burgeoning field of science was often at odds with religious orthodoxy. Galileo, for instance, found himself in hot water with the Church for his heliocentric views. It was a time when pushing boundaries came with serious risks, sometimes costing you your freedom, or worse. The Renaissance may have opened doors, but not without slamming a few shut on those who dared to question too loudly. And what about the social sphere? The Renaissance was a man's world, where the concept of the Renaissance man took center stage, leaving women largely in the wings. Sure, there were trailblazers like Isabella d'Este and Sophonisba Anguissola, but they were exceptions in a male-dominated narrative. It's a sobering reminder that even in times of great progress, societal norms often lagged behind. As we sift through the remnants of the Renaissance, it's clear the era left us with a mixed bag. On one hand, it was a time of unparalleled artistic and intellectual achievement, a beacon of creativity that still inspires. On the other, it was a period rife with inequality, exclusion, and conflict. The Renaissance was a mirror reflecting both the best and worst of human nature, a period where light and shadow danced together, casting a complex image that's as intriguing as it is unsettling. So, how does this grand tapestry of history connect with our modern world? The Renaissance reminds us that innovation and inequality often go hand in hand. Today, we see similar patterns in our tech-driven society, where groundbreaking advancements coexist with stark social divides. The cycle continues, albeit with Wi-Fi and smartphones. In the end, the Renaissance teaches us that history is not a linear narrative of progress. It's a series of loops and spirals, where the same themes, innovation, power, inequality, reappear in new guises. It's a reminder that while we may have traded frescoes for digital art and city-states for nation-states, the essence of humanity remains constant. We strive, we create, we falter, and we rise again, each era adding its own chapter to the ongoing story of human endeavor. As we wrap up this journey through the Renaissance, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy of this extraordinary period. It's a legacy of beauty and contradiction, of triumph and tragedy. It's a story that continues to unfold, as relevant today as it was centuries ago. So next time you gaze at a masterpiece or ponder a philosophical question, remember that you're part of a grand tradition that stretches back to the bustling streets of Renaissance Italy. And who knows? Perhaps in a few centuries, future historians will be analyzing our era with the same curiosity and wonder. After all, history has a habit of repeating itself, this time with Wi-Fi. Back in the 13th century, when Pisa wasn't just a leaning tower, but also a bustling port city, there lived a young man named Leonardo, who would eventually shake up the mathematical world with all the vigor of a medieval rock star. Of course, we're talking about Leonardo Fibonacci, a name that somehow doesn't roll off the tongue at cocktail parties as easily as, say, Einstein or Pythagoras. But it should. The guy was a mathematical dynamo, and his story starts in the sunlit alleys of Pisa around 1170. Picture a young Leonardo growing up beneath the Tuscan sun, surrounded by the sound of merchants haggling and ships creaking in the harbor. Pisa was more than just a postcard scene. It was a cultural and commercial melting pot. Trade routes pumped the city's veins with influences from Byzantium, Egypt, and beyond. And right there, in this cauldron of commerce and culture, Leonardo's father, Guglielmo Bonacci, was not your average medieval dad. He was a merchant, which back in the day meant he was the guy with the business savvy to make deals across the Mediterranean. This was a time when being a merchant was no small potatoes. It was akin to being a global entrepreneur today. Guglielmo was sent to oversee a trading post in Bugia or Bijaya, in what's now Algeria. This was the Silicon Valley of the medieval world for mathematics and science. Young Leonardo was taken along for the ride, and let's just say it wasn't a typical father-son bonding trip. Forget fishing trips or camping weekends. This was a full immersion into the world of numbers, calculations, and a whole lot of sand. while his peers in Pisa were probably playing medieval marbles or whatever kids did back then. Leonardo was mingling with Arab mathematicians who were light years ahead in their understanding of numbers. They used a positional number system, a concept about as foreign to Europeans at the time as a smartphone would be to a caveman. The Arabs had inherited and expanded on the mathematical wisdom of the ancient Greeks, Indians, and Persians. They used something called Hindu-Arabic numerals, which might not sound like a big deal unless you've tried doing long division with Roman numerals. Spoiler, you can't. Leonardo was intrigued. He saw how these numerals allowed for easier calculations, something decidedly practical for his dad's business dealings, and quite frankly, for the future of mathematics. This numerical epiphany would eventually lead him to write his most famous work, Liber Abaci, in 1202, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, young Leonardo was absorbing these foreign concepts like a sponge, albeit a sponge with a burgeoning mathematical genius. Let's not sugarcoat it. Mathematics in the Middle Ages wasn't exactly a sexy career path. It was often seen as arcane, maybe a bit mystical, and definitely not something you'd brag about at a medieval dinner party. Yet, Leonardo saw the power and beauty in numbers. He wasn't just learning math, he was learning a new way to see the world. Imagine the thrill of discovering that the universe could be understood and manipulated with a few clever symbols. His travels across the Mediterranean were more than just sightseeing tours with stops at exotic ports. They were educational expeditions into the heart of mathematical innovation. In Egypt, he witnessed the legacy of ancient mathematicians who had been solving equations before the Romans even thought of inventing aqueducts. In Constantinople, he saw the remnants of Greek mathematical prowess. Each stop was a chapter in his growing understanding of the world and his place in it. Leonardo's exposure to this diverse mathematical ecosystem wasn't just a case of being in the right place at the right time. It was a deliberate educational strategy by a father who understood the value of practical knowledge. Guglielmo might not have been able to explain the quadratic equation, but he knew that understanding the mathematics of his trading partners could give his son, and by extension, their family business, a serious edge. The irony is that while Guglielmo was focused on the bottom line, he inadvertently set his son on a path to mathematical greatness. Leonardo's eventual contributions would transcend mere merchant calculations. He would take these lessons learned from Arab mathematicians and transform them into a legacy that would stretch across centuries, influencing everything from the Renaissance to the algorithms that now rule our digital lives. So here's Leonardo Fibonacci, a young man with a head full of numbers and a passport well stamped with the ink of cultural exchange. He was living proof that sometimes the best education happens not in the confines of a classroom, but in the chaotic, bustling world outside. And as he returned to Pisa, his mind was a cauldron bubbling with ideas that would eventually spill over into the pages of Liber Abaci, a book that would do for math what the printing press would later do for the written word, revolutionize it. But that's a story for another time. For now, Leonardo was just a young man with a world of potential, standing on the brink of mathematical history. So here we find Leonardo Fibonacci, back in Pisa, a young man brimming with mathematical epiphanies. Picture him with a quill in hand, ink-stained fingers racing to capture the whirlwind of numbers and ideas swirling in his mind. It's 1202, and he's about to pen the medieval math equivalent of a blockbuster novel. Liber Abaci*. Now, before you roll your eyes and mentally file math books under snooze fest, let's set the scene. At the time, Europe was stuck in a mathematical rut. Roman numerals were the norm, and let's just say they made calculations about as fun as a root canal. Imagine trying to multiply XCI by Roman 47 without losing your marbles. Spoiler alert, it's not pretty. Enter Liber Abaci*, a manuscript that wasn't just a book, it was a gauntlet thrown at the feet of European mathematicians. Fibonacci didn't just write a book, he wrote a revolution. He introduced the Hindu-Arabic numeral system to Europe, a system as revolutionary as swapping your horse for a Ferrari. This might sound mundane now, but back then it was like discovering fire. Fibonacci's book was the ultimate math guide, covering everything from basic arithmetic operations to complex algebraic equations. But what made it truly groundbreaking was its practicality. Leonardo didn't just write about abstract concepts. He translated them into real-world applications. He crafted examples that would resonate with the everyday merchant or trader trying to make sense of a rapidly changing economic landscape. One of the most famous parts of Liber Abaci is the rabbit problem. Ah, yes, the rabbit problem, where Fibonacci lays out a hypothetical scenario involving a pair of rabbits. Each pair reproduces every month, and each new pair begins reproducing from their second month of life. Leonardo used this simple problem to illustrate a sequence of numbers that would later be known as the Fibonacci sequence. You know, that magical sequence where each number is the sum of the two preceding ones. Today, it's hailed as a mathematical legend, finding its way into everything from stock market predictions to the spirals of galaxies. But back then, it was just a clever way to show how numbers could model real-life scenarios. In practical terms, Liber Abaci was a game-changer for commerce. Hindu-Arabic numeral system was far superior for calculations than the cumbersome Roman system. Merchants could now perform arithmetic with ease, calculating profits and losses without needing an abacus or a prayer. It was like upgrading from a typewriter to a laptop, except instead of writing your novel, you're calculating the cost of spices from the Far East. Despite its brilliance, Liber Abaci didn't exactly fly off the medieval shelves. Many were skeptical, clinging to their Roman numerals like a security blanket. Change, after all, is about as popular in the medieval period as a rainstorm at a picnic. The book was met with both awe and suspicion, a common fate for visionaries who dared to challenge the status quo. It's worth noting that Fibonacci wasn't just a number-crunching recluse. He was a man of the world, acutely aware of the economic and social dynamics of his time. Europe was on the cusp of a commercial revolution, and his work laid the groundwork for the sophisticated financial systems that would emerge. The ability to calculate interest, currency conversion, and trade profits with precision wasn't just useful, it was transformative. But let's not romanticize too much. While Fibonacci was laying the mathematical groundwork for the Renaissance, Europe was still a place where superstition often trumped reason. The idea that numbers could hold power was both appealing and terrifying. People loved the magic of numbers when it helped them tally their wealth, but feared it when it hinted at a world they couldn't fully control. So, there you have it, a glimpse into the mind of a man who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. Fibonacci's Liber Abaci wasn't just a book about numbers, it was a manifesto for progress. In the dusty streets of Pisa, a mathematical rock star was born, and his legacy would echo across the centuries, shaping the very fabric of modern mathematics. As we close this chapter, remember that while Fibonacci's ideas were revolutionary, they were also very human. They were born out of curiosity, a desire to understand the world better, and a drive to make life just a little bit easier. And isn't that what all great innovations aspire to do? Stay tuned for our next exploration, where we'll delve deeper into the rabbit hole of Fibonacci's contributions and the ripple effects they had across history. While Fibonacci's ideas were revolutionary, they were also very human. They were born out of curiosity, a desire to understand the world better, and a drive to make life just a little bit easier. And isn't that what all great innovations aspire to do? But let's put a pin in that thought for now, because we're about to dive headfirst into the swirling vortex of Fibonacci's legacy, and how it somehow went from a medieval math problem about rabbits to a modern-day symbol of beauty and mystery. First, let's talk about this infamous sequence. The numbers go 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. You get the gist. Each number is the sum of the two preceding ones, a simple rule with complex implications. But here's the kicker. Nowhere did Leonardo himself ever claim these numbers held any mystical or aesthetic power. Nope, the idea that the Fibonacci sequence is the key to the universe's beauty is something we cooked up later. Humans, it seems, have an insatiable appetite for finding patterns, even when none might exist. Fast forward a few centuries, and we find ourselves in the world of architecture, where the Fibonacci sequence is whispered about like some architectural holy grail. The Parthenon, Fibonacci numbers, the pyramids, you guessed it, Though in reality, the jury's out on whether ancient builders were consciously applying Fibonacci principles. But hey, who doesn't love a good myth? The allure of sacred geometry is just too tempting to pass up, kind of like believing that eating chocolate cake won't ruin your diet. Now, let's sprinkle in a bit of economic spice. Fibonacci's numbers have slithered their way into modern stock trading algorithms. Yup, when you're looking at your financial portfolio and thinking about your retirement, there's a bit of medieval math wizardry at play. Traders are drawn to Fibonacci ratios like moths to a flame, claiming these numbers can predict market movements. It's a bit like trying to predict the weather with a crystal ball. Sure, there's a method to it, but it's not exactly foolproof. The golden ratio, often associated with Fibonacci numbers, is about as ubiquitous as avocado toast in a hipster cafe. Approximately 1/618, this ratio is said to appear in everything from the Mona Lisa's smile to the spirals of galaxies. But before you start measuring your facial proportions with a ruler, remember this. The golden ratio's supposed omnipresence is more folklore than fact. Studies suggest that while it pops up here and there, it's not the universal constant many believe it to be. But as with all good myths, it's more about the story than the evidence. Back in the day, Fibonacci's work was more side note than spotlight. Sure, *Liber Abaci* was a game-changer for those in the know, but it wasn't as if Leonardo was being mobbed by fans asking for autographs. His sequence was a mathematical curiosity, not a blueprint for the cosmos. It's like discovering a catchy tune, only to find out it was never a chart-topper back in its day. Fibonacci's rabbit numbers might have been just an example of generational growth, but over time they've become a symbol of nature's patterns. Pine cones, sunflowers, seashells. Nature seems to love Fibonacci numbers. Or maybe we just love to think it does. People have a knack for seeing patterns where none were intended, which is both a quirk of human nature and the foundation of conspiracy theories everywhere. And speaking of quirky human behavior, let's not overlook how people have latched onto Fibonacci in the arts. Painters, musicians, and even poets have claimed to use Fibonacci's sequence to give their work an air of mathematical sophistication. It's a bit like sprinkling truffle oil on everything to make it fancy, but whether it's truly integral or just an artist's gimmick is up for debate. In examining the myths versus reality of Fibonacci's legacy, we're reminded of the age-old human desire to find order in chaos. We crave the comfort of patterns, especially in a world as unpredictable as ours. Fibonacci's numbers give us a sense of understanding, a way to connect the dots in the grand tapestry of existence. But sometimes, the lines we draw are more about imagination than science. So here we are, centuries after Leonardo scribbled down his rabbit problem, knee-deep in a world where his sequence is revered as both mathematical magic and a cosmic cipher. It's a testament to human creativity and our love for a good story. We've taken a simple mathematical sequence and woven it into the very fabric of our cultural consciousness. As we wrap this segment, remember that while Fibonacci's sequence might not hold all the answers to life's mysteries, it does remind us of our endless quest to make sense of the world. Stay tuned as we continue to untangle the web of Fibonacci's legacy and explore how this medieval mathematician's work has rippled through time, influencing everything from art to algorithms. Let's just say that the story of Fibonacci is far from a simple sequence. It's a complex tapestry, and we're only just beginning to unravel it. With Fibonacci's sequence leaving us in a mathematical fever dream, let's pivot to some of his lesser-known, yet equally mind-boggling contributions. Imagine a medieval mind tackling the complexities of number theory. Now that's a party trick worthy of a Pisa Street performer. While everyone else was busy worrying about plagues and papal edicts, Fibonacci was knee-deep in abstract mathematics, pondering the fate of numbers like a proto-Newton. One of his significant, albeit unsung, contributions was his work on what we now call Diophantine equations. Named after the Greek mathematician Diophantus, these are equations where the solutions are required to be integers. Think of it as solving math problems with numbers that don't believe in fractions. A purist's dream. Fibonacci tackled these with the same vigor you'd expect from someone who could see the beauty in a rabbit population explosion. He didn't stop there. Fibonacci was also intrigued by prime numbers, those mysterious indivisibles that have puzzled mathematicians for centuries. In his Liber Quadratorum Asterisk, or Book of Squares, he explored ways to find perfect squares and sums of squares. This wasn't just a theoretical exercise, it was a stepping stone towards understanding the properties of numbers that would later underpin modern cryptography. If you ever wonder why your online transactions are secure, you might just have Fibonacci to thank. But let's face it, medieval Europe wasn't exactly a hotbed of intellectual curiosity. Trying to promote new mathematical ideas was like convincing a medieval peasant that bathing was beneficial. A hard sell. The social and political landscape was far from supportive. The Latin-speaking, Roman numeral-loving academic circles were skeptical of anything remotely Arabic, despite the fact that Arab scholars were leagues ahead in math. Talk about cutting off your nose to spite your face. Fibonacci had to navigate a world where novelty was often met with suspicion, or worse, outright hostility. The Catholic Church, wielding power like a scepter, was wary of anything that diverged from tradition. Mathematics, with its ties to Islamic culture, was often viewed with a side eye, like a medieval version of a foreign import tax. Leonardo's challenge was to introduce these ideas without triggering the medieval equivalent of a Twitter backlash. Despite these barriers, Fibonacci found allies in unlikely places. He corresponded with Emperor Frederick Roman II, a ruler with a penchant for knowledge and a curiosity that matched Fibonacci's own. Frederick was a bit of a Renaissance man before the Renaissance was cool, gathering scholars from across the known world to his court. Under Frederick's patronage, Fibonacci found a platform to share his ideas, a rare case of enlightened sponsorship in a world still grappling with the Dark Ages. However, the reality was that Fibonacci's work didn't receive widespread acclaim during his lifetime. Europe wasn't ready to ditch its mathematical training wheels. It wasn't until the Renaissance, a few centuries and a Black Death later, that his manuscripts were dusted off and appreciated for the genius they contained. The Renaissance, that great love affair with classical knowledge, was like a cultural scavenger hunt, rediscovering lost treasures from the past, and Fibonacci's work was a jackpot find. Fibonacci's journey from obscurity to posthumous fame is a classic tale of hindsight being 20/20. In his day, he was respected but not revolutionary. It took the collective wisdom of later generations to recognize the brilliance of his insights. His work was like a time capsule, waiting for the right moment to shine. In the grand narrative of history, his story is a reminder that genius often needs a little marinating before it's fully appreciated. In the end, Fibonacci's legacy is more than just a sequence of numbers. It's a testament to the power of curiosity and the courage to challenge the status quo. It's about the thrill of discovery and the satisfaction of turning the abstract into the practical. And while his contemporaries were busy counting their rosary beads, Fibonacci was busy counting something far more enduring, the numbers that would change the world. So, as we weave through the narrative of Fibonacci's contributions and the hurdles he leaped over, remember that history is often like one of his sequences, seemingly random at first glance, but upon closer inspection, a beautiful pattern emerges. Stay tuned as we continue this mathematical odyssey, exploring how a medieval merchant's son from Pisa left an indelible mark on the tapestry of human knowledge. And so, as we stand on the shoulders of this Pisa-born giant, let's take a moment to reflect on what all of this means. Fibonacci, the mathematical maestro who wouldn't have recognized a stock market if it hit him with a scroll, has somehow become a patron saint of traders and tech geeks everywhere. It's ironic, isn't it? The man who introduced Europe to Arabic numerals is now more famous for a sequence that was, to him, just an afterthought. A cool party trick involving rabbits that managed to burrow its way into the cultural zeitgeist. Let's not mince words. The historical hero narrative often paints Fibonacci as a solitary genius, a lone wolf howling mathematical truths into the medieval abyss. But the reality was far more nuanced. Leonardo was a product of his time, an era when intellectual cross-pollination was the name of the game. His brilliance wasn't born in a vacuum. It was molded by the diverse mathematical traditions he encountered across the Mediterranean. He was less of a maverick and more of a savvy synthesizer, blending the best of global knowledge into something truly transformative. Now, here's a fun twist of fate. While Fibonacci himself could hardly have foreseen the long-term implications of his work, his influence today is undeniable. From the Fibonacci retracement levels in stock trading to the aesthetic appeal in art and architecture, his name is uttered with a reverence usually reserved for rock stars and reality TV icons. And while Leonardo would probably be amused, or more likely bemused, by this modern-day adulation, it's a testament to the enduring power of his ideas. Take algorithmic trading, for instance. It's a high-stakes game where fractions of a second can mean the difference between a windfall and a wipeout. Traders employ Fibonacci levels, hoping they can predict market swings with the precision of a Swiss watch. There's a certain irony here. A medieval math whizz's musings now underpin the digital scaffolding of Wall Street. It's like discovering Shakespeare was the original ghostwriter for your favorite soap opera, unexpected, yet strangely fitting. And what about the arts? The arts. Fibonacci's sequence has been romanticized as the key to unlocking the universe's aesthetic secrets. We've all heard whispers of the golden ratio, that mystical one. 618 that supposedly graces the Mona Lisa's smile and the spirals of seashells. But let's not get carried away. While the golden ratio is a neat mathematical trick, its supposed omnipresence is more about our hunger for patterns than any divine blueprint. We humans have a knack for seeing what we want to see, a tendency as old as time itself. As we sift through the annals of history, we find that Fibonacci's real legacy is not about a sequence or a ratio. It's about a mindset, a way of thinking that encourages us to look beyond the obvious and to question the status quo. Leonardo's contributions were grounded in practicality, yet they sparked a curiosity that transcended the mundane. His work laid the foundation for mathematical exploration, a legacy that continues to fuel our quest for understanding. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Fibonacci's genius wasn't fully appreciated in his own time. Europe took centuries to catch up with his ideas, a testament to the glacial pace of medieval progress. It wasn't until the Renaissance that his work was dusted off and given the recognition it deserved. And today, as we navigate the complexities of a hyper-connected world, we owe a nod to this medieval mathematician whose ideas continue to ripple through time. So as we wrap up this journey through Fibonacci's life and legacy, let's savor the absurdity of it all. Leonardo Fibonacci, the unassuming son of a Tuscan merchant, has become a symbol of mathematical elegance and economic savvy. He showed us that sometimes the most profound insights come from the simplest questions, like how fast do rabbits breed under ideal conditions? And while we may never solve all of life's mysteries, Fibonacci reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is a worthy endeavor, even if it begins with something as humble as a rabbit problem. In the grand tapestry of history, Fibonacci's story is a testament to the unpredictable, often serendipitous nature of human progress. It's a reminder that our greatest achievements often sprout from the seeds of curiosity, nurtured by the willingness to explore the unknown. And as we continue to unravel the threads of his legacy, we're left with a richer understanding of the world and our place within it. In the end, Fibonacci's legacy isn't just about numbers. It's about the enduring power of ideas to transcend time, space, and context. And that, dear listeners, is a tale worth telling, one that continues to inspire mathematicians, artists, traders, and dreamers alike. So, until we meet again on our next historical adventure, remember, sometimes the simplest questions lead to the most fascinating journeys. And who knows, the next Fibonacci might be out there right now, asking their own humble questions, ready to change the world. You're sitting in your comfy chair, maybe sipping on a latte, thinking how adventurous it would be to embark on a medieval pilgrimage. I mean, who wouldn't want to trudge across medieval Europe, right? But let's dive into that fantasy and see if it really measures up to the hype. Spoiler alert, it's not all grand cathedrals and spiritual awakenings. First up, the allure of the pilgrimage. It's like the ultimate medieval road trip, complete with relics, tales of miracles, and a dash of divine redemption. Back in the day, people weren't scrolling Instagram for #pilgrimage goals. They were searching for salvation, healing, or maybe just a break from the monotony of peasant life. A pilgrimage was like hitting the spiritual jackpot without having to wait for the afterlife. The religious drive was real. We're talking a society where the church was the big cheese. Think the Vatican wielding more power than your local government. So, pilgrimages were less about the journey and more about the destination. People flocked to holy sites like Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, or Rome, hoping to shave off some purgatory time or cure an ailment. You could say the medieval marketing machine was in full swing, with tales of miracles and relics drawing in the crowds like bees to honey. But let's not forget the social factor. A pilgrimage was like the medieval version of a social mixer. It was a chance to meet people outside your tiny village bubble, swap stories, and maybe even form alliances. Plus, it offered a legitimate reason to leave your village without being labeled a runaway serf. Now, let's get to the not-so-glamorous part, the roads. Oh boy, the roads. Picture this. No comfy sneakers, no paved paths, just unending stretches of dirt, mud, and occasional cobblestones that probably felt like walking on Lego bricks. If you thought your morning commute was bad, try a 500-mile trek with nothing but your trusty feet and maybe a donkey if you're feeling fancy. On a good day, you might cover 15 to 20 miles. On a bad day, well, let's just say your Fitbit wouldn't be impressed. And here's the thing, medieval roads weren't just physically demanding. They were rife with danger. Highwaymen lurked like bandits from a Robin Hood tale, sans the noble cause. These guys would relieve you of your possessions faster than you could say, Hail Mary. The romantic notion of a noble quest. Yeah, more like a medieval boot camp with a side of existential dread. Pilgrims faced everything from wild animals to raging rivers. And if that wasn't enough, Mother Nature had no chill, throwing rain, snow, or scorching sun into the mix. The myth of the noble quest is a pretty package wrapped in centuries of nostalgia. Sure, Chaucer made it sound like a jolly parade in the Canterbury Tales, but that's just the poetic gloss over some gritty realities. Back then, a pilgrimage was more about endurance than enlightenment. Let's not forget the economic side of things. Pilgrimages weren't exactly cheap. You'd need money for food, lodging, and maybe a new pair of shoes if yours gave out halfway to Jerusalem. For some, the cost of a pilgrimage could rival their annual income. Think of it as splurging your life savings on a spiritual stock market, hoping for divine returns. And if you were a pilgrim of the well-to-do variety, you might even have a mule or two to carry your baggage. But let's be real, most were trudging along, carrying their worldly possessions in a knapsack. This wasn't a gap year in Europe. It was a gamble with everything on the line. Yet despite the mud, bandits, and economic strain, people kept coming. They braved the odds, fueled by faith or desperation. Because at the end of the day, what was a little hardship compared to the promise of salvation or healing? The pilgrimage was as much about the journey as the destination, even if that journey involved a lot more blisters than bliss. So, would you really last a day on a medieval pilgrimage? If you're still fantasizing about it, I've got a few more tales to tell that might just change your mind. But hold on to that thought, because in a world where the church was king and the roads were wild, the real adventure was surviving to tell the tale. But now, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of what it actually cost to embark on one of these spiritual marathons. Spoiler alert, it wasn't for the faint of heart or light of purse. In medieval Europe, setting off on a pilgrimage was akin to deciding to buy a Tesla on a barista's salary. You were essentially committing to bleed your wallet dry, hoping the spiritual ROI would be worth the financial woes. First up, you've got the tolls. Yes, medieval Europe was a patchwork of toll roads, each lord and abbey eager to extract their pound of flesh, or more accurately, their penny of silver. Every bridge you crossed, every patch of land you trudged through, potentially meant coughing up a fee. And let's not kid ourselves. These weren't your friendly neighborhood toll booths with smiling attendants. No, these were guarded by surly men who probably hadn't bathed since the last crusade. The cost could vary wildly, but even a single penny toll could sting when you're a peasant making maybe 2 to 3 pennies a day. And then there's the matter of accommodations. Unlike today's budget hostels, medieval inns were an unpredictable mix of flea-ridden beds and dubious-looking stews. If you were lucky, you might score a spot in a monastery offering hospitality for a prayer or two, but more often than not, you'd be shelling out anywhere from a halfpenny to a full penny for a night under a thatched roof. For context, in the 14th century, a skilled laborer might earn about 5 pennies a day, while a peasant could hope for 2. So, when you're on a pilgrimage that could last months, those pennies add up faster than your New Year's resolutions crumble by February. Food was another budget buster. Forget dining on a medieval charcuterie board. Pilgrims often subsisted on stale bread and watery ale, the medieval equivalent of ramen noodles. A loaf of bread could cost you a farthing, a quarter of a penny, and good luck finding fresh produce unless you were willing to barter or pilfer. Meat was a luxury, and fish, if you could afford it, was the medieval version of a cheat day. Those pennies you had left after tolls and lodging. Say goodbye to them at the next market stall for a few bites of sustenance. Now, what if you hit a snag, like a busted sandal or a broken wagon wheel? Repairs weren't cheap, and neither was replacing gear. A sturdy pair of shoes, essential for those endless miles, could set you back a few shillings. For comparison, a shilling was 12 pence, so you'd be dropping serious coin just to keep moving. Of course, pilgrims weren't entirely helpless. They had their survival hacks, like traveling in groups for safety and shared expenses. This medieval form of carpooling not only deterred highwaymen, but also split costs. Pilgrims might also carry a pilgrim's badge. Think of it as a medieval Groupon, which sometimes scored them discounts or even freebies at certain stops. Religious houses along the route often offered alms or a heart meal, though the quality varied. It was a bit of luck and a lot of divine intervention. And let's not forget the unexpected expenses. Bad weather could force a detour, adding days and costs. Sudden illness might mean paying for a healer's dubious remedies, which could range from herbal brews to leeches. And then there were the indulgences. The church wasn't shy about selling forgiveness, if you had the cash. These spiritual IOUs were a hot commodity, promising to shave off some purgatory time, and every pilgrim was tempted to invest a little in their soul's future. Despite the financial strain, it was the lure of the pilgrimage that kept people coming back for more. The blend of faith, fear, and fervor was intoxicating. Even when it meant returning home penniless, the spiritual and social currency gained was priceless. Just imagine returning to your village with tales of foreign lands and pious deeds, your version of a medieval Instagram story, minus the filters. However, don't forget, the economic burden was a serious gamble. For many, especially peasants, it was a once-in-a-lifetime venture, a Hail Mary pass with little guaranteed in return. Yet, in a world where life was brutish and brief, the pilgrimage offered hope, however fleeting. It was a chance to transcend the daily grind and touch the divine. So next time you daydream about throwing on a cloak and wandering off to Canterbury or Compostela, remember, it's not just the blisters on your feet that'll hurt. Your wallet's likely to feel the pinch too. And as you ponder that, let's keep the medieval journey rolling. There's still more to explore on this road of trials and tribulations, where faith meets finance in the most unexpected ways. Stay tuned for more tales from the medieval road. Trust me, we're just getting warmed up. As we trudge further down the medieval rabbit hole, let's talk about what really went down on those pilgrimages, beyond the jingling of coins. You might imagine a serene journey of introspection, but the reality was more like an episode of Survivor, minus the camera crew. Let's start with the distances. We're talking hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles on foot. From England to Santiago de Compostela, you'd be hoofing it roughly 200 miles. That's like walking from New York to Miami, with no air conditioning and a good chance of getting mugged. Now, about those feet. Medieval footwear wasn't exactly the epitome of support. Shoes were often little more than leather sacks tied around your feet, and if you were unlucky, you'd be rocking some wooden clogs. Blisters and calluses were your constant companions, and if you thought modern sneakers gave you foot odor, imagine the medieval equivalent. Not to mention, each step was a potential invitation for a more sinister surprise: infections. Even a minor blister could go south fast without neosporin and a band-aid. Now let's take a pit stop at the health risks. Picture this: medieval Europe, where the common cold could be a death sentence. Hygiene wasn't exactly a top priority, with bathhouses being about as rare as a unicorn sighting. Diseases were the ultimate hitchhickers, from dysentery to the infamous Black Death. A pilgrimage was a veritable buffet for bacteria. Travelers often packed their bags with ailments picked up along the way, transforming them into walking petri dishes. But wait, there's more to this medieval health saga. Injuries were as common as bad weather. Imagine trekking through dense forests and rocky paths, where a sprain or a broken bone could literally stop you in your tracks. Medical care was a mixed bag of herbal remedies and prayers, more faith than science. If you were lucky, you'd find a healer who might offer a tincture of questionable herbs. If not, It was time to hope your companions had a strong back to carry you. Now, let's debunk the romantic myth of spiritual enlightenment. Sure, you might start with the best of intentions, seeking divine revelation. But months of grit, grime, and grinding discomfort tended to cloud that spiritual vision. Instead of epiphanies, pilgrims often faced exhaustion and disillusionment. The harsh conditions could turn even the most devout into grumbling cynics, questioning if the relic at journey's end was worth all the trouble. For some, the mental toll was as grueling as the physical. Long stretches of solitude, interspersed with brief interactions in foreign tongues, could leave you feeling more isolated than ever. It was introspection on steroids, with no escape from your thoughts as you trudged mile after mile. Anxiety about the next meal or shelter was your constant companion, and for many, the pilgrimage was a crucible, testing faith as much as physical endurance. Water, that most essential of lifelines, was another medieval gamble. Streams and wells were the only sources, but they were often breeding grounds for parasites. Drinking untreated water was a roll of the dice, and if you lost, dysentery was your prize. Forget about the luxury of hydration packs or purification tablets. It was often a choice between thirst and a potential stomach-churning illness. Meanwhile, the creature comforts we take for granted today were nowhere to be found. Forget pillows or mattresses. Pilgrims often slept on straw, if they were lucky, or the hard ground if not. Blankets were a luxury, and if your journey took you through colder climates, hypothermia was a genuine threat. Hunger was a constant specter, with meager rations that left you dreaming of the medieval equivalent of a buffet or even just a full loaf of bread. The romance of it all lies in the tales passed down, which often gloss over these gritty realities. Chaucer might have spun a whimsical narrative, but for most, the pilgrimage was a test of grit and survival. Yet despite all this, the allure of the pilgrimage remained strong. Whether it was faith, desperation, or a stubborn sense of adventure, the call to embark on these arduous journeys was irresistible to many. So next time you're tempted by the idea of a medieval pilgrimage, remember, it's less about the spiritual glow-up and more about the blisters and bandits. The medieval road was a crucible where faith met endurance in a test of wills. And while we've only scratched the surface of this gritty journey, there's more to explore in the coming tales. Buckle up, because this medieval saga is far from over. But hold on to your medieval hat, because the real story behind pilgrimages is about to get a lot more tangled, like Game of Thrones level tangled. The church, relics, and the Crusades all played their part in shaping this grand medieval road trip. It wasn't just about wandering for spiritual enlightenment or the chance to brag about your blisters. Nope, this was a high-stakes game of politics, power, and piety. So let's chat about the church, the ultimate puppet master of the Middle Ages. Picture it as the medieval Google, controlling information, influencing decisions, and having a say in just about everything. The church wasn't just your Sunday hangout. It was the powerhouse running the show. Pilgrimages were one of its best plays, a divine keraton stick promising salvation. And who was in the driver's seat? The Pope, of course, wielding more power than the average medieval monarch. The church turned pilgrimages into a spiritual economy, with holy sites dotting Europe like Starbucks in Manhattan. Each site had its own relics, the medieval version of must-see attractions, allegedly possessing miraculous powers. Think of them as the original influencers, drawing the faithful like Black Friday sales. Speaking of relics, let's unravel their mystique. These weren't just dusty old bones. They were the medieval equivalent of a backstage pass to heaven. Each relic had its own legend, like the femur of a saint that could cure gout, or a splinter from the true cross that guaranteed a shorter stint in purgatory. It was a relic arms race, with churches vying to claim the most potent piece of holy history. And pilgrims, they were the willing participants in this spiritual scavenger hunt, each hoping to touch, see, or even snatch a bit of heaven on earth. The more sensational the relic, the further people flocked. St. James in Santiago de Compostela, the bones of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury, each drew crowds like rock stars on tour. But wait, there's more. The Crusades, those infamous military expeditions to the Holy Land, were like the medieval version of a grand tour, only with a lot more swords and significantly fewer selfies. The Crusades were partly about reclaiming sacred sites from the infidels, but they also opened up new routes and destinations for pilgrims. Suddenly, a pilgrimage to Jerusalem was the ultimate badge of honor, if you survived the journey, of course. The Crusades fueled the pilgrim industry, turning it into a booming business. Pilgrims became the medieval jet set, trading stories of their adventures like travelers swapping tales of backpacking through Europe. Now, let's talk power dynamics. The pilgrimage wasn't just a spiritual journey, it was a social ladder. Nobles, peasants, merchants, and monks all rubbed shoulders on the road, albeit reluctantly. For the lower classes, it was a rare taste of freedom, a chance to break the chains of feudal life, if only temporarily. For the upper crust, it was a chance to show off their piety and perhaps their latest fashion from Paris. Pilgrimages blurred social lines, creating a temporary community united by faith and foot blisters. But don't get too misty-eyed over the egalitarian vibe. Power still played its games. Nobles often traveled with entourages, turning what should have been a humble spiritual retreat into a medieval Coachella, complete with tents and servants. Meanwhile, the church capitalized on the influx of pilgrims, charging for everything from blessings to indulgences. It was a spiritual marketplace where salvation had a price tag, and the church was the ultimate vendor. And what about those relics? They weren't just religious trinkets, they were political tools. Cities with popular relics gained prestige and an influx of tourist cash. It was the medieval version of hosting the Olympics, with all the accompanying boost to local economies. Remember, we're talking about a time when a single relic could draw tens of thousands of pilgrims, each spending money on food, lodgings, and of course, more indulgences. Cities vied for these religious artifacts, sometimes even resorting to holy theft, a euphemism for swiping relics from rival churches. These relics were the medieval equivalent of having the Mona Lisa or the Hope Diamond, except they promised divine favors instead of just bragging rights. So, as you can see, pilgrimages were far from the simple, pious quests they're often painted to be. They were wrapped up in a complex web of power, politics, and profit. The church used them to assert dominance, cities leveraged them for economic gain, and pilgrims embraced them as a chance to transcend their earthly troubles. Yet, despite the politics and the peril, the romantic allure of the pilgrimage persisted. It was a chance to step outside the ordinary, to seek something greater, and maybe, just maybe, to find a little piece of heaven on earth. As we wrap up this leg of our medieval journey, remember that behind every saintly story lies a gritty reality. The roads were harsh, the politics cutthroat, and yet the allure of the pilgrimage, the promise of salvation, adventure, and a temporary escape from the mundane, was irresistible. So, would you have survived a medieval pilgrimage? The journey was as much about navigating the labyrinth of power as it was about reaching a sacred shrine. Stay tuned as we continue to peel back the layers of this fascinating medieval tapestry in the next episode of our historical deep dive. And so, as the dust settles on our medieval exploration, let's take a step back and consider what these ancient pilgrims might have to teach today's globetrotters. Spoiler alert, it's not just about collecting stamps in a passport or finding the perfect Instagram filter for that sunset view. Pilgrimages, despite their grit and grime, were more than just a test of endurance. They were a reminder of the human spirit's relentless pursuit of meaning, no matter the century. The legacy of these arduous journeys is surprisingly resilient. Think about it. In a world without Expedia or Google Maps, people willingly embarked on treks that could rival a season of Survivor. Why? Because the promise of a greater purpose was far more intoxicating than any margarita on a beach. Modern-day adventurers might recognize a similar drive in their quests for authentic experiences, though today's pilgrimages might involve yoga retreats in Bali or marathon tours of European capitals, complete with Wi-Fi and air conditioning. But let's not kid ourselves about the differences. Today, embarking on a journey often means deciding between business class or the aisle seat, hardly the mortal gamble of crossing medieval Europe. Back then, every step was fraught with risk, from bandits to disease, with a splash of divine intervention thrown in for good measure. It was less about the destination and more about surviving the journey itself. Imagine booking a vacation where the itinerary included potential highway robbery and a side of the bubonic plague. Suddenly, that layover in Newark doesn't seem so bad, does it? Yet, the romanticized narrative of the pilgrimage remains appealing. There's something irresistible about the idea of seeking enlightenment through hardship. It taps into our innate desire to find meaning beyond the mundane, to transcend our everyday lives. Whether it's walking the Camino de Santiago or hiking the Appalachian Trail, these modern pilgrims are chasing that same elusive sense of fulfillment that their medieval counterparts sought centuries ago. Here's the twist. The myth of the noble quest reveals as much about human nature as it does about history. We're drawn to stories of transformation, tales where ordinary folks rise above their circumstances in pursuit of something greater. It's why we love movies with underdog heroes and why we're moved by tales of personal triumph. The Pilgrimage, in its raw, unfiltered form, is the ultimate underdog story, a gritty saga of survival against the odds. And let's be real, the medieval pilgrimage was nothing if not a crucible for character. It was in these trials that pilgrims found a deeper connection to their faith and to each other. Today's adventurers might not face the same physical perils, but the search for connection and purpose remains a constant. There's a reason why finding oneself has become a travel cliché. Strip away the Wi-Fi and the creature comforts, and you might find that the essence of the pilgrimage hasn't changed all that much. It's still about testing your limits, questioning your beliefs, and seeking answers to life's big questions, just without the risk of medieval gangrene. So what can modern-day adventurers learn from these ancient travelers? For starters, the value of perseverance. Medieval pilgrims weren't just out for a stroll, they were on a mission, one that required grit, determination, and a fair bit of stubbornness. There's a lesson there for anyone who's ever faced a delayed flight or a lost luggage fiasco. The journey, with all its bumps and bruises, is often where the real stories are made. Another takeaway: the importance of community. Pilgrims didn't travel alone. They formed bonds with their fellow wanderers, sharing burdens and stories along the way. It's a reminder that even the most individual journeys are enriched by the people we meet and the connections we forge. Whether it's the stranger who helps you navigate a foreign city or the fellow traveler who shares a meal, these interactions are the fabric of our travel tales. But let's not forget the economic angle. Pilgrimages, after all, were a booming business in their day. The church turned spirituality into an industry, complete with tolls, relics, and indulgences. Today's travel industry isn't so different, with its own array of fees and upgrades. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? So next time you're tempted by that all-inclusive package or that authentic cultural tour, remember the medieval pilgrims who paved the way for tourism as we know it. In the end, the pilgrimage endures because it speaks to something elemental in us all, the desire to explore, to seek, and to understand. It's a journey that transcends time, reminding us that the quest for meaning is as old as humanity itself. And while today's travelers might swap blisters for boarding passes, the spirit of the pilgrimage continues, one step at a time. So, would you last a day on a medieval pilgrimage? Probably not, unless you're keen on trading your sneakers for wooden clogs and your Wi-Fi for a prayer. But you might just find that the spirit of the pilgrimage lives on in every journey you take and every story you tell. As we wrap up this historical road trip, remember, the real adventure begins where the map ends and the unknown beckons. Safe travels, fellow wanderers. Step right into the organized chaos of Tenochtitlan's marketplace. Think of it as a 15th century version of Wall Street, but with more feathers and less insider trading. You've got the Potstecker, those crafty Aztec traders, darting between stalls like caffeinated squirrels, their minds abuzz with the next big deal. The stakes here aren't just about getting the best bang for your buck. It's about survival in a society where cocoa beans can double as currency, and your place in the social hierarchy determines if you're selling Jaguar pelts or just plain old maize. Now, before you start picturing these traders as some kind of ancient hedge fund managers, let's clear up the basics. The Aztec economy was a barter system on steroids. Sure, they had cocoa beans, which were essentially the Bitcoin of the day. Imagine buying a turkey for about 20 beans, but for the most part, it was all about the goods. You could trade obsidian knives for cotton cloaks, or if you were really in the game for the long haul, copper axes for high-quality embroidered textiles. This wasn't just about buying and selling. It was an intricate dance of negotiation and cunning. The marketplace itself, think more stadium than supermarket. Tlaxcalco, the big daddy of marketplaces, saw up to 60,000 people on a good day. And that's not just Aztec propaganda. Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés himself was so impressed, he couldn't help but mention the market's grandeur in his letters back to Charles V. Imagine the buzz, the clamor, the sheer human energy of that many people in one place. No wonder the Parchdecker had to be sharp. And these Parchdecker weren't just your average Joe Schmo hawking goods. They were an elite, almost like a secret guild with their own rules and rituals. They didn't just trade. They were cultural ambassadors, spies, and sometimes even warriors. In a society where class was as rigid as the stone pyramids, the Parchdecker had a foot in both the noble and commoner worlds. Their success in the market could make or break their status, so they walked a tightrope of diplomacy and ruthlessness. Of course, not everyone could just waltz into the marketplace and start trading. Oh no, the Aztecs had this social hierarchy thing down to a fine art. At the top, you had the nobles and priests, who could trade luxury goods like exotic bird feathers and jade. The commoners, meanwhile, could stick to basics like foodstuffs and everyday tools. But here's the kicker. Some Parchdecker were so influential, they could bypass these restrictions, rubbing shoulders with the elites. If you're imagining this as some kind of pre-Columbian utopia where everyone got along, let's pump the brakes. The reality was harsh. Competition was fierce, and getting a good spot in the market was like landing a penthouse view, expensive and often reserved for those with connections. It was survival of the fittest, Aztec style, and the Parchdecker had to be as shrewd as they were savvy. And what about the goods themselves? Obsidian blades sharper than a samurai sword, textiles dyed in colors so vibrant they'd make a rainbow blush, and spices that could give any modern-day chef a run for their money. The Aztecs didn't just trade in items, they traded in stories, ideas, and innovations. Every transaction was a thread in the complex tapestry of their society, weaving together the economic, social, and political fabric of the Aztec world. But let's not get too romantic here. For all the vibrancy and color of the marketplace, there was a dark underbelly. The Parchdecker weren't above a little espionage, gathering intelligence for the king as they traveled. In fact, they were kind of like the James Bonds of Mesoamerica, minus the martinis. And if you think they were all about the free market, think again. The Aztec state had its fingers in every pie, regulating prices and goods to keep the economy and the social order stable. In essence, the marketplace was a microcosm of Aztec life itself, vibrant, dynamic, and full of contradictions. It was a place where you could rise through the ranks or fall into obscurity, where every transaction carried weight, and every cocoa bean had value. So, if you were a Parchdecker in Tenochtitlan, you didn't just survive the marketplace. You thrived on its challenges, navigating its complexities with the agility of a jaguar and the cunning of a fox. That was the real art of Aztec trading. So, you've got your Parchdecker thriving in the marketplace, but before you start thinking their lives were all cocoa beans and rainbows, let's hit the road, literally. These guys weren't just hanging around Tenochtitlan, admiring their feathered headdresses. They were the jet-setters of their time, trekking thousands of miles across Mesoamerica. Picture them as the original global supply chain managers, minus the corporate jargon and PowerPoint presentations. The Parchdecker's trade routes resembled a spider's web spun over the entire region. We're talking about a network stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean and beyond. They were the original long-haul truckers, except instead of 18-wheelers, they had their own 2 feet and maybe a few trusty tamims, porters who carried loads that could make a modern-day mover wince. These guys were the unsung heroes, schlepping up to 50 pounds of goods over treacherous terrain. Talk about leg day every day. Their missions were nothing short of epic. Take Quetzal feathers, for instance. These weren't just decorations. They were the bling of the Aztec world, worth their weight in, well, cocoa beans. To fetch these beauties, Parchdecker would journey to the distant jungles of modern-day Guatemala. It wasn't just a walk in the park. Think dense forests, perilous mountain passes, and the constant threat of banditry. Forget Netflix thrillers. This was real-life high stakes. Speaking of banditry, the roads could be as dangerous as a piñata at a kid's party. Those lush jungles and remote paths were prime real estate for bandits, ready to relieve a Parchdecker of both goods and dignity. But fear not, our traders weren't just sitting ducks. They traveled in caravans for protection, and some were even trained in combat. If the Aztecs had a mantra, it was probably trade hard, fight harder. And then there was the delightful matter of imperial taxation. The Aztec Empire wasn't running a charity, after all. Every time a Pachdecker crossed into a different region, they faced tolls and taxes as inevitable as the sunrise. These weren't your average sales taxes either. The Aztec state was as hungry for tribute as a teenager is for Wi-Fi. Imagine coughing up a chunk of your precious cocoa beans at every checkpoint. It was like a perpetual game of Monopoly, except the banker always wins. But necessity is the mother of invention, and the Pachdecker were nothing if not inventive. They became masters of negotiation, schmoozing local leaders for exemptions or employing good old-fashioned bribery. If smooth-talking was an Olympic sport, these traders would have taken gold every time. They knew how to work the system, and in a world where the rules were as flexible as a yoga instructor, that was a skill worth its weight in jade, another hot commodity they lugged back from the highlands. Jade, unlike the Quetzal feathers, was about solid status. The Aztecs believed it embodied life and fertility, making it the ultimate must-have accessory for the elite. To acquire it, Pachdecker had to navigate the tricky politics of dealing with the Maya and other regional powers. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy, trade, and sometimes outright flattery. Imagine convincing a rival chief that you're his best friend while secretly plotting to outtrade him. All's fair in love and war, and apparently trade too. Yet with all these hurdles, why did the Pachdecker bother? Simple, because the rewards were astronomical. Successfully bringing back luxury goods meant not just wealth but social ascension. In a society obsessed with status, that was the ultimate prize. For the Pachdecker, trading was more than commerce. It was a game of strategy, survival, and social climbing worthy of any modern-day boardroom drama. But don't let the romance of the road fool you into thinking it was all adventure and gain. The Pachdecker's life was grueling, and the risks were real. Dangers lurked at every turn, hostile tribes, treacherous landscapes, and the ever-present threat of disease. Yet, much like today's entrepreneurs, they were driven by the lure of high reward and the thrill of the chase. They were the original risk-takers, blazing trails that would shape the economic landscape of Mesoamerica. In essence, the Pachdecker were the lifeblood of the Aztec economy, pumping goods and ideas through the arteries of the empire. They were the connectors, the innovators, and the risk-takers, bridging cultures and economies with each step they took. Their journeys were the stuff of legends, filled with danger, intrigue, and the relentless pursuit of that next big deal. So, next time you grumble about a long commute or a tough negotiation, spare a thought for the Pachdecker, who did it all with nothing but sandals and sheer determination. So as our Pachdecker, those tireless trailblazers of trade, trekked across Mesoamerica, they were doing more than just hauling jade and Quetzal feathers. They were the Aztec Empire's unofficial diplomats, weaving a web of influence that stretched as far as their sandaled feet could take them. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was no peaceful mission of cultural exchange. The Aztec state had a voracious appetite for tribute, and the Pachdecker were critical cogs in its imperial machinery. Imagine the Aztec Empire as that ravenous beast in your nightmares, always hungry and never quite satisfied, consuming everything in its path. Tribute wasn't just about getting the best goods, it was about power. Every cocoa bean, every bolt of cotton, every carved obsidian piece was a reminder of the empire's reach. The Pachdecker, with their trade routes that were more like tentacles, helped keep this beast fed. They weren't just traders, they were pawns, and sometimes knights, in a high-stakes game of imperial chess. Now, the Aztecs didn't just gobble up neighboring territories willy-nilly. There was a method to their madness, a strategic hunger that focused on economically and politically valuable regions. This was Empire Building 101. They didn't just want to expand, they wanted to control trade routes, those vital arteries that pumped wealth into the heart of Tenochtitlan. In the grand scheme, trade routes were less about the goods themselves and more about the influence they carried. These pathways were the subtle veins of power, and the Aztecs were the masters of the map. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Aztec Empire, like any great power, had its share of headaches. When you're managing a realm that stretches from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean, things are bound to get a bit unruly. Tribute demands were a double-edged sword. Sure, they filled the coffers, but they also sowed seeds of resentment. Imagine being a subjugated city-state, forced to fork over your hard-earned goods to a distant overlord. It was like being stuck in a bad contract with no escape clause. And here's where the empire's political machinations came into play. The Aztecs were like the original spin doctors, using tribute not just to enrich themselves, but to keep potential rivals in check. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy and domination, where vassal states were kept just happy enough not to revolt, but always aware of who held the power. The Parchdecker, with their knack for negotiation and diplomacy, were essential to this balancing act. They were the empire's eyes and ears, collecting intelligence as they traded, ensuring that any whiff of rebellion was nipped in the bud. But here's the kicker. This insatiable appetite for tribute and expansion was as much a curse as it was a blessing. The Aztecs were playing a dangerous game, one that required constant growth to sustain itself. It was a classic case of the empire on a treadmill, needing to run faster just to stay in place. This relentless push for more tribute spurred their expansion, but it also stretched their resources thin. The more they conquered, the more they had to manage, and the more they risked overreaching. All the while, these trade routes weren't just highways for goods, they were conduits for ideas and cultures. As the Parchdecker moved between regions, they exchanged more than just commodities. They swapped stories, beliefs, and innovations, acting as cultural brokers in an increasingly interconnected world. But don't mistake this for some Kumbaya moment of mutual understanding. The Aztecs were pragmatic, open to adopting whatever made them stronger while discarding the rest. It was cultural appropriation and adaptation in one fell swoop. The Parchdecker, then, were the facilitators of this cultural exchange, the quiet connectors who ensured the Aztec Empire remained at the forefront of Mesoamerican innovation. They were like the original startup entrepreneurs, always looking for that next big idea, the latest trend to exploit. But unlike today's corporate types, their risks were real and their stakes much higher. For every successful trade mission, there was the looming threat of failure, and in the Aztec world, failure was rarely an option. Yet all this maneuvering, all this strategic expansion, would eventually sow the seeds of the empire's downfall. The Aztecs' insatiable hunger for tribute and power made them many enemies, and the trade networks they relied upon became the very webs that entangled them. As much as these routes were paths of prosperity, they were also the avenues through which discontent and rebellion spread like wildfire. The empire's over-reliance on tribute was its Achilles heel, vulnerability that would be exploited by those who sought to bring it down. In the end, the Parchdecker were more than just traders. They were participants in a grand narrative of ambition and downfall. They were the pulse of the Aztec economy, the lifeblood of an empire that dared to reach for the stars, yet found itself caught in the gravitational pull of its own ambitions. So, as we leave the bustling trade routes and the political machinations behind, remember this. In the world of the Aztecs, trade was power, and power was everything. Yet, as history has shown time and again, even the mightiest of empires can stumble under the weight of their own desires. So, in the grand tapestry of Aztec trade, the Parchdecker weren't just players. They were the threads weaving the fabric of the marketplace's social dynamics. Think less Wall Street stockbrokers, and more Renaissance merchants with a flair for drama and a knack for politicking. The marketplace wasn't merely a place to swap goods. It was the bustling heart of Aztec society, a social hub where trading was as much about who you knew as what you sold. Let's start by setting the scene. Picture Tlatelolco Market, a sprawling mass of stalls and chaos, teeming with life like an over-caffeinated anthill. Here, merchants weren't just hawking their wares. They were wielding influence akin to nobility. And why not? A society where cocoa beans and social networks were equally valuable currencies, these traders knew how to navigate the complex web of social hierarchies. Now, about those hierarchies. The Parchdecker had it down to a science. They weren't just merchants. They were maestros of negotiation, a skill honed to razor-sharp precision. In a world where every transaction was a potential power play, these traders could haggle like their lives depended on it. Because sometimes they did. Negotiation was an art form, a delicate balancing act of charm, wit, and the occasional bluff. It was less used car salesman, more diplomatic envoy with a penchant for bartering. But here's the kicker. Negotiation wasn't just about goods and prices. It was about status. A successful deal wasn't just a win in the marketplace. It was a step up the social ladder. Merchants who played their cards right could gain prestige, rubbing shoulders with the nobility, while those who faltered risked slipping into obscurity. It was a high-stakes game where every cocoa bean counted and every trade could tip the scales of social standing. And speaking of high stakes, let's not forget the role of family businesses. The marketplace was a family affair, with trade secrets passed down like heirlooms. Picture family dynasties, each with their own specialty, whether it was textiles, obsidian blades, or exotic feathers, with skills honed over generations. These families were the backbone of Aztec commerce, their reputations as valuable as the goods they sold. A well-established family business was a ticket to influence, with alliances built through marriages and partnerships that could rival any Game of Thrones subplot, minus the dragons. Family businesses also meant that the marketplace was a microcosm of Aztec life, where personal and professional lines, blurred like a watercolor painting in a rainstorm, was a place where alliances were forged and rivalries stoked, where gossip spread faster than a wildfire in a thatched-roof village. In essence, the marketplace was the original social network, minus the digital footprint, but with all the drama intact. And yes, it was a drama. The market was as much a stage for social interactions as it was a venue for economic exchange. Picture a cacophony of voices, a kaleidoscope of colors, and the ever-present hum of bartering. For the Parchdecker, the market was a theater, and they were the leading actors, their performances judged not just by profit, but by prowess in the art of the deal. But as with any good theater, there were rules, legal codes that kept this vibrant chaos from descending into outright anarchy. The Aztecs had a knack for order, and their legal system was as intricate as it was strict. For a society that thrived on trade, these laws were the invisible hand guiding the marketplace, ensuring that transactions flowed as smoothly as possible in a world where disputes were as common as rain in the wet season. Trade laws were enforced with the kind of discipline that would make a modern bureaucrat proud. Prices were regulated, disputes swiftly adjudicated by judges who doubled as market overseers. Theft and fraud were met with harsh penalties, a reminder that while the stakes were high, the consequences of crossing the line were even higher. It was a system designed to keep the market, and by extension, Aztec society, running like a well-oiled machine, albeit with a few squeaky gears now and then. Yet, for all their orderliness, these legal codes also reflected the complexities of Aztec society. They were as much about maintaining social harmony as they were about economic efficiency, a reflection of a culture that prized balance and order. They were the unsung heroes of the marketplace, the silent enforcers that ensured trade was more than just a free-for-all. In the end, the marketplace was a microcosm of Aztec society, a vibrant tapestry of commerce, culture, and community. It was a place where the Parchdecker thrived not just on the strength of their goods, but on the power of their connections, their ability to navigate the intricate dance of social and economic dynamics. So, as you wander through the bustling aisles of Tlatelolco in your mind's eye, remember this: the marketplace was more than a place of trade. It was the beating heart of the Aztec world, a testament to the power of commerce and community. And as we delve further into this journey, keep in mind that the marketplace was just one stage in the grand theater of Aztec life, a scene in a much larger drama that continues to unfold. So, as we delve deeper into the Aztec marketplace, let's take a moment to appreciate its legacy. The Parchdecker, those agile traders who once darted through the bustling aisles of Tlatelolco, left footprints that stretch all the way to our modern economy. They were resourceful, relentless, and perhaps a bit ruthless, qualities that have somehow survived the test of time. If you squint hard enough, you might even see their spirit in today's Wall Street brokers or Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, minus the feathered headdresses and cocoa bean currency, of course. The Aztec trade network was more than just a series of interconnected markets. It was a living, breathing organism. Picture it as the internet of the pre-Columbian world, with Parchdecker as the original data packets, ferrying information across vast regions. Their trade routes were the arteries of the empire, pumping goods and ideas across Mesoamerica. And while the goods have changed, swap out obsidian knives for smartphones, jade for NFTs, the underlying principles remain remarkably similar. Let's start by acknowledging the sheer scale of the Aztec trade system. At its peak, the empire stretched over 80,000 square miles, encompassing parts of modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize. The Pachteca were the brave souls who navigated this vast terrain, connecting diverse cultures and economies. They were the ultimate networkers, their influence reaching far beyond the borders of Tenochtitlan. In today's world, they'd be linked in influencers, with connections in every city-state and a penchant for strategic alliances. One of the most enduring legacies of the Aztec trade network is the concept of specialization. The Pachteca were specialists par excellence, each family honing a particular craft or trade. This wasn't just about making a living. It was about fulfilling the needs of a complex society that demanded everything from everyday essentials to luxury items. Sound familiar? It should. Today's global economy thrives on the same principle, with countries and companies carving out niches in everything from technology to textiles. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The Aztecs had their fair share of economic hiccups, much like our modern world. They faced inflation when too many cocoa beans flooded the market, and they grappled with supply chain disruptions long before the term entered corporate jargon. These challenges forced the Pachteca to adapt, innovate, and occasionally resort to less-than-legal means to keep the wheels of commerce turning. If that sounds like a page from a modern entrepreneur's playbook, it's because some things never change. Now, let's talk about the original gig economy. The Pachteca were freelancers of a sort, operating outside the rigid class structures of Aztec society. They weren't bound by land or title, but by their wits and skills. They could rise through the ranks by sheer merit, an idea that remains tantalizingly appealing in today's meritocratic fantasies. Of course, the reality was a bit more complex. For every Pachteca who struck it rich, there were countless others who struggled to keep their sandals in the game. But isn't that the eternal lure of entrepreneurship? The promise of striking gold, or in this case, cocoa beans. Speaking of beans, let's not forget the Aztecs' contribution to the world of finance. Cocoa beans were the Bitcoin of their day, a commodity with intrinsic value that could be traded, saved, or spent. They might not have had crypto wallets, but they understood the importance of a reliable medium of exchange. In a world where cashless transactions are becoming the norm, the Aztecs were ahead of their time, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most enduring. But perhaps the most significant lesson the Pachteca offer today's traders is the art of resilience. They thrived in a world of constant change, where the only certainty was uncertainty. They adapted to new markets, embraced new technologies, and navigated political upheavals with a deftness that would make any modern CEO envious. In a global economy that's constantly shifting, their ability to pivot and persevere is a lesson worth remembering. Yet, while we celebrate their ingenuity, let's not forget the darker side of Aztec commerce. The empire's thirst for tribute and expansion left a trail of resentment and rebellion, a cautionary tale for any empire or corporation that grows too quickly for its own good. The Aztecs' reliance on tribute was a double-edged sword, fueling their economy while sowing the seeds of their eventual downfall. It's a reminder that even the most successful systems are vulnerable to their own excesses. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Aztec trade, let's leave with a playful yet poignant reminder. The goods may have changed, but the game remains the same. The stakes are different, the players have new tools, and the arena is global. But the essence of trade, of connecting, negotiating, and thriving, is timeless. The Pachteca may no longer walk the bustling aisles of Tlaxcala, but their legacy endures in every trade deal, every market stall, and every ambitious entrepreneur seeking their place in the sun. So, whether you're haggling over a used car or closing a billion-dollar deal, spare a thought for those ancient traders who paved the way. They were the original risk-takers, the pioneers of commerce who dared to dream big. And while history may not always remember their names, their spirit lives on in the bustling markets and busy boardrooms of today. The Pachteca may be long gone, but their legacy is everywhere, proof that while the world moves on, the dance of trade remains eternal. If the ancient Maya had social media, their news feeds would be flooded with the ostentatious lives of the royals and nobles. Think less keeping up with the Kardashians, and more keeping up with the Kainish Janab Pakal, the Ajor or king of Palenque. This guy knew how to live large, minus the hashtags, of course. The Maya social hierarchy was like a pyramid Fittingly enough, with the Adjor perched right at the top, surveying his domain like a monarch surveying his latest Instagram post. Now, let's talk about this Adjor. He wasn't just a fancy title. He was the top banana, the big cheese, the head honcho. His job, to make sure the guards were happy, the people were fed, and the kingdom was expanding its influence. In terms of bling, he would have given modern billionaires a run for their money. It's not like he could log onto Amazon and buy a new jade mask, but he did drape himself in finery that would make a rapper's jewelry stash look like a thrift store find. We're talking jade, feathers, and fancy textiles, all flaunted at public ceremonies where even the most ardent fashionista would be green with envy. The Adjor was the ultimate influencer, his actions setting trends and his decisions shaping lives. But this wasn't just about looking good. The wealth disparity in the Maya world was as vast as the Yucatan Peninsula itself. At the top, the royals and nobles lived lives of luxury, while the common folk were more concerned about the next meal than the next stylist. In today's terms, the Adjor was like the CEO of a multinational corporation, wielding power and influence, while the rest of the populace were the employees, keeping the whole operation running smoothly. And just like modern CEOs, the Adjor had a board of advisors, the nobles. These guys were the aristocratic elite, the trusted aides who helped manage the affairs of state. They were the medieval version of a corporate board, with the added perk of really cool hats. Speaking of the nobles, they had their own hierarchy, because why not complicate things further? There were the Sagil, essentially the vice presidents of the kingdom, handling regional duties and keeping the local lords in line. Their lives weren't too shabby either, filled with feasts, rituals, and the occasional bloodletting to ensure the guards didn't decide to send a meteor their way. Because in the Maya world, keeping the cosmic order was just another Tuesday. Now, let's throw some numbers into this historical soup. While the Adjor and his nobles were basking in their wealth, the average Maya laborer was eking out a living, contributing to the grand ceremonies by offering crops, labor, and sometimes a bit of blood. It's estimated that the average Maya farmer worked with a plot size of about 1.5 hectares, around 3.7 acres for those keeping score at home. Meanwhile, the elites were lounging in palatial estates, their wealth often obscured by the mists of time, but undoubtedly significant. So why did this social structure matter? It wasn't just about who got the biggest slice of the metaphorical pie. The hierarchy was essential for maintaining order and stability in a society that believed the universe itself depended on the right people doing the right things at the right time. The Adjor's role was cosmic as well as political, a combination of CEO and high priest, responsible for ensuring that the sun continued to rise and the crops didn't fail. No pressure, right? But let's not get too misty-eyed about the grandeur of it all. For every dazzling ceremony and sacred ritual, there were countless peasants working the fields, ensuring the survival of the society that held them in its grip. The social structure of the Maya was a testament to the power of hierarchy and belief, a system that kept the wheels turning until, well, it didn't. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's just appreciate the fact that while today's celebrities might have millions of followers, the ancient Maya had millions of believers, convinced that the fate of the world rested on the shoulders of their earthly rulers. While the Adjor and his entourage were playing Game of Thrones, Mesoamerican edition, there was another group of folks who were quietly laying the economic groundwork for the Maya civilization. Enter the middle class, the artisans and merchants. These were the people who made the Maya world tick, like the gears of a cosmic clock, minus the celestial drama. They were the ones who added a little spice to the daily grind, ensuring that society didn't just survive, but thrived. Think of them as the clever Instagram influencers of their age, charming and resourceful, without the need for Wi-Fi, but with all the cultural clout. The artisans were the original creators, the hands that turned raw materials into masterpieces. Picture this: a Maya artisan hunched over a workbench, meticulously carving a piece of jade that would later become part of the Adjor's bling collection. These artisans were the unsung heroes of the Maya economy, the ones who transformed the mundane into the magnificent. And they weren't just crafting jewelry. Pottery, textiles, and even monumental sculptures were all part of their repertoire. Their craftsmanship was in such demand that they could easily barter their wares for food, shelter, or even a seat at the local gossip circle. Now, these artisans didn't work in isolation, like lone wolves howling in the jungle. They were part of bustling workshops, often tied to royal or noble households, because, of course, the elites loved to flaunt their wealth through art. But here's where it gets juicy. Some artisans had enough swagger to work independently, selling their creations in the vibrant markets that dotted the Maya landscape. Talk about side hustles with style. And speaking of markets, let's chat about the merchants, those intrepid souls who were the backbone of the Maya trade networks. These folks were the ancient equivalent of global traders, minus the cargo ships, but with all the adventure. The Maya merchants traveled hundreds, even thousands of miles, creating trade routes that stretched from Mexico to Honduras. They were the ones who brought back exotic goods like cacao, obsidian, and quetzal feathers, the kind of stuff that would make any Adjor's eyes twinkle with greed. These trade networks were like the social media platforms of their time, connecting different regions and spreading cultural influences faster than you can say trending. And while we're busting myths, let's talk about that romantic image of the lone merchant trekking through the jungle with a caravan of goods. Reality check. Many merchants traveled in groups for safety and camaraderie. After all, even the best traders needed a buddy system when navigating the perilous rainforest paths. What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of this trade. We're talking about routes that spanned hundreds of miles, with some estimates suggesting that a single merchant could cover 15 to 20 miles a day on foot. Now, that's commitment. They traded everything from salt to slaves, but the real MVP of the Maya marketplace was cacao, the ancient version of a Starbucks gift card, used as currency and consumed as a luxury. A single cacao bean could buy you a tamale, which, back then, was like scoring a Michelin-starred meal on a budget. But before we get too lost in the nostalgia of ancient trade, let's take a moment to appreciate the role of the merchants in the larger societal picture. Their work wasn't just about profit, it was about connection. They were the cultural curators, the ones responsible for bringing back not just goods, but ideas, stories, and innovations from distant lands. Imagine the kind of tales they could spin around a fire, each one a fragment of a world beyond the horizon. And while we're painting this picture of a vibrant middle class, let's not gloss over the harsh realities. The life of a merchant was no walk in the park. It was a perilous profession, with risks ranging from bandits to natural disasters. Plus, there was always the chance that a rival city-state might decide that your goods were just too tempting to resist. In a world where the political landscape was as volatile as a reality TV reunion show, merchants needed to be as savvy as they were daring. Artisans and merchants might not have had the ostentatious status of the royals or the nobles, but they wielded power in their own right. Their skills and bravery ensured the flow of goods and culture, and they played a crucial role in the economic engine of the Maya civilization. They were the innovators, the trendsetters, and yes, the influencers of their time, proving that while the Adjor might have been the face of the franchise, the middle class was the heart that kept it all beating. So, next time you marvel at a piece of ancient Maya art or sip your hot chocolate, spare a thought for those anonymous artisans and merchants who shaped history with each brushstroke and trade deal. Because while the royals might have had the crowns, these folks had the creativity. And let's face it, that's a currency that never goes out of style. And just like that, we've set the stage for the next chapter in this unfolding drama of ancient society. Stay tuned, because the plot is only about to thicken. But before we get too carried away with the artisans and merchants, it's time to roll up our sleeves and dig into the dirt, literally. Let's talk about the commoners, the unsung heroes who kept the Maya civilization ticking like a well-oiled machine, even if that machine was fueled by sweat and back-breaking labor. You see, while the Adjor was busy being the rock star of the Maya world, and the artisans were crafting their masterpieces, the commoners were the ones making sure there was actually something to eat at the end of the day. They were the agricultural backbone, the ones who worked from sunrise to sunset, ensuring that the wheels of society kept turning as smoothly as a stone roller on a newly paved plaza. First things first, let's debunk the idyllic image of the Maya commoners as peaceful farmers living in harmony with nature, singing Kumbaya under the starlit skies. The reality was far less romantic and a lot more grueling. These folks were locked in a daily battle with the land that was as intense as any Game of Thrones plot. Picture this. Every morning they faced the relentless sun, armed with nothing but a wooden digging stick called a koa, and the hope that today's harvest would be enough to pay the taxes and fill their bellies. Forget Instagram filters. These people lived in a world where nature didn't care about likes or hashtags. The Maya commoners were primarily maize farmers, because in the Maya world, maize was king. They practiced a form of agriculture known as milpa, a traditional Mesoamerican farming method that involved slash-and-burn techniques. It was a cycle of cutting down forest areas, burning the vegetation to enrich the soil with ash, and then planting crops. Talk about fiery determination. But before you think it's all just setting things ablaze and calling it a day, there was a science to this madness. The milpa cycle was a delicate balance, one that required precise timing and a keen understanding of the land. These farmers were not just toiling the earth, but playing the long game, rotating crops to keep the soil fertile and hoping Mother Nature didn't throw a wrench or a drought into their plans. And speaking of droughts, let's address the elephant in the room. The Maya faced them like an unwelcome houseguest that just wouldn't leave. A drought could last for years, turning lush fields into barren wastelands faster than you can say climate change. And when your livelihood depended entirely on the whims of the weather, a drought was more than just an inconvenience. It was a full-blown existential crisis. Imagine working tirelessly, only to watch helplessly as your crops withered away under the blazing sun. It was a harsh reality, one that tested the limits of survival and resilience. But wait, it gets even more intense. On top of battling the elements, the commoners had to deal with taxes. Yes, taxes, because even in ancient times, the taxman cometh. The Maya rulers didn't just rely on goodwill to keep their lavish lifestyles afloat. They imposed taxes on the commoners, demanding a share of their crops and labor. It wasn't just about handing over a few ears of corn. It was a significant portion of their hard-earned harvest. Talk about adding insult to injury. In some regions, the tax rate could be as high as 20 to 30%, which, if you think about it, makes modern tax season seem like a breeze. And if the commoners couldn't pay their taxes in maize or other produce, they had to offer their labor instead, building temples, roads, or whatever grand project the Ajor had in mind. Now, let's sprinkle in some numbers to spice up this historical stew. The average Maya household consisted of 5 to 10 members, all of whom contributed to the farming efforts. They worked with fields that ranged from 1.5 to 3 hectares, depending on their location and the whims of local lords. It's a stark contrast to the palatial estates of the nobles, a daily reminder of the social hierarchy that ruled their lives. And speaking of hierarchy, these commoners weren't just faceless peasants in a historical tableau. They were skilled farmers, each with a deep understanding of agricultural cycles and techniques that would make a modern agronomist nod in appreciation. But let's not kid ourselves. Life wasn't just an endless grind of farming and taxes. There were moments of respite, times when the commoners could gather for festivals, ceremonies, and community events. These occasions offered a break from the daily toil and a rare chance to bond, celebrate, and maybe even indulge in some fermented cacao drink. Because what's a party without a little indulgence? Yet, even these moments were tinged with the ever-present awareness of their social standing and the responsibilities that awaited them at dawn. So, why does all this matter? Because understanding the life of a Maya commoner is like peering into the engine room of a vast ship, the one that kept the entire civilization afloat. Their labor wasn't just a means to an end. It was the foundation upon which the grandeur of the Maya world was built. While the elites may have orchestrated the symphony, it was the commoners who provided the rhythm, the steady beat that drove the pulse of society. In the grand tapestry of Maya civilization, the commoners were the threads that held it all together, weaving a story of resilience, endurance, and unyielding spirit. They remind us that history isn't just about the kings and the conquests. It's about the everyday people who lived, loved, and labored in the shadows of greatness. So, next time you admire a piece of Maya art or marvel at a towering pyramid, remember the countless hands that made it possible, the lives spent in service to a society as complex and fascinating as the jungle it thrived in. And while we've just scratched the surface of their story, fear not, dear listener. There's more to uncover in this ancient saga, more layers to peel back as we continue this journey through the heart and soul of the Maya world. Stay tuned, because the plot is only getting thicker, and the best is yet to come. And speaking of the heart and soul of the Maya world, let's shift our gaze to a group that often played a silent yet powerful role in steering the course of history: Maya women. Time to throw off the dusty cloak of outdated stereotypes and shine a light on their real contributions. Spoiler alert. Far from being confined to the domestic sphere, they were key players in the political and religious arenas of their society. If you thought the Ajor was the be-all and end-all of Maya leadership, think again. Women were right there, making waves, even if history often edited their stories out like a post-production cut. You might be asking, but weren't women just domestic divas, tending to the hearth and home? That's the myth we're here to bust. Sure, they managed households and child-rearing duties, tasks that were as relentless as a never-ending tick-tock scroll, but they were also formidable forces in public life. In fact, some climbed the social ladder all the way to the top, reigning as queens in their own right. Take Lady Kay Abel, for instance. She wasn't just any queen, she was the Kalumt, a title that translates to Supreme Warrior. Her reign in the 7th century at the city-state of El Peruwaka was marked by military prowess and political acumen. She was the Bay-and-Say of the Maya world, commanding respect and wielding power with grace and determination. And let's not forget about Lady Six Sky of Naranjo, who took the throne in the late 7th century. Her reign was so influential that she initiated a golden age for Naranjo, orchestrating alliances and overseeing battles. Talk about defying expectations. These women weren't just sitting around embroidering textiles. They were leading troops and orchestrating state affairs. They had the smarts, the guts, and the strategic minds needed to navigate the complex political landscapes of their time. It's like they were playing 4D chess while everyone else was still figuring out checkers. But wait, there's more. Women in Maya society were also deeply involved in religion, acting as priestesses and spiritual leaders. They partook in ceremonial life, interpreting the sacred texts and performing rituals essential to the continuity of cosmic order. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Maya books, mentions numerous female deities and priestesses, showing that women held significant religious authority. These priestesses didn't just chant incantations. They were the lifeline between the divine and the earthly realms, ensuring that the gods were appeased and cosmic balance maintained. In a world where religion was as vital as Wi-Fi is today, their roles were crucial. But let's not romanticize too much. Being a woman in Maya society was no fairy tale. It was a world of expectations, where societal roles were as rigid as a stone tablet. From birth, women were groomed for marriage, their worth often tied to their ability to produce heirs and manage households. They were expected to uphold the family's honor, a task that carried as much weight as a stone glyph. And while some women did rise to power, the majority remained in the shadows, their lives largely dictated by the men around them. It was a delicate dance of power and submission, a balancing act that required finesse and resilience. And speaking of resilience, let's delve into the economic contributions of Maya women. They were the unsung heroes of the domestic economy, ones who kept the household running smoothly. From spinning and weaving textiles to crafting pottery and preparing food, their work was integral to the survival of their communities. The textiles they produced weren't just functional. They were works of art, traded across regions, and contributing significantly to the local economy. Picture a Maya woman at her loom, her hands moving with practiced precision, creating patterns that were as intricate as the society she lived in. These textiles were more than mere clothing. They were a symbol of cultural identity and economic prowess. But wait, there's another layer to this historical onion. Women also participated in trade and market activities, bartering goods and keeping the wheels of commerce turning. They were the original entrepreneurs, managing small businesses and ensuring the flow of goods in local marketplaces. Inscriptions from various sites mention women as active participants in trade, a testament to their economic acumen. It's a stark reminder that while they might not have had the political clout of their male counterparts, they wielded economic influence that was just as significant. So, why does all this matter? Because acknowledging the role of Maya women offers a more complete picture of their society. It wasn't just a man's world. It was a complex tapestry of gender dynamics, where women played crucial roles in maintaining the social, political, and economic balance. Their stories remind us that history is not just about kings and conquests, but about the countless individuals who shape the world in ways both grand and subtle. And while we're at it, let's take a moment to appreciate the societal expectations thrust upon these women. They were the glue that held families together, the silent architects of social order. Their contributions were essential to the continuity of Maya society, proving that behind every successful civilization is a cadre of strong, resilient women. They remind us that history is not just about the battles fought and won, but about the lives lived in myriad shades of struggle and triumph. As we dig deeper into the annals of history, we uncover stories that challenge our perceptions and enrich our understanding of the past. The tales of Maya women are a testament to the complexity of human society, a reminder that the narratives we inherit are often only a fraction of the full story. So, as we continue this journey through the Maya world, let's keep our minds open and our curiosity piqued, for the past is as layered and fascinating as the jungles that once enveloped this ancient civilization. And remember, the best is yet to come, as we unravel the tales of a world that continues to captivate and inspire. And while we're unraveling the tales of this captivating civilization, let's dive into the heart of the matter. Why did the mighty Maya eventually stumble? It's a bit like watching a blockbuster where the hero trips right before the final showdown, unexpected and loaded with foreshadowed drama. The Maya, with their astronomical observations and architectural prowess, weren't brought down by a single villain, but by a series of plot twists that make for a gripping historical narrative. First off, let's talk about the environment like it's the unruly guest at a dinner party who won't stop knocking over your carefully planned seating arrangements. The Maya heartland, while lush and verdant, was a bit of a diva when it came to consistent climate conditions. Droughts hit the region with the kind of regularity that would make even the most seasoned weatherman nervous. These dry spells weren't just minor hiccups. They were full-blown crises that spanned decades, turning once fertile lands into dust bowls. And when your society is built on agriculture, that's as close to a disaster movie as it gets. Cornfields shriveled, water reservoirs dried up, and suddenly the gods seemed less like benevolent deities and more like indifferent landlords. But wait, there's more. The environment wasn't the only chaotic force at play. The Maya's rigid social structure, which had once been their strength, turned into an Achilles heel. Much like a game of Jenga, where each block removed makes the tower wobblier, the Maya hierarchy was stacked against change. The Ajor and his nobles, while fabulous with their jade bling and feathered capes, were not exactly the best listeners when it came to reform. Power was concentrated at the top, and the inflexibility of their system left little room for adaptation. It's like trying to update your phone's software on a device that's too old to handle it. Eventually, it crashes. While the commoners broke their backs in the fields, the elites were busy playing politics, sometimes with a side of warfare. Intercity conflicts and rivalries were as common as mosquitoes in the jungle. These weren't just minor skirmishes either. They were full-scale wars that drained resources and manpower. Think of it as a Game of Thrones episode, but with more feathers and fewer dragons. And while this internal strife kept the nobility entertained, it also drained the societal coffers and distracted from more pressing issues like, say, the impending environmental doom. Now, let's add another layer to this historical lasagna: population pressure. By the time the classic Maya period was hitting its stride, the population was booming, with some estimates suggesting there were as many as 11 million people spread across the Maya lowlands. That's a lot of mouths to feed, and when the food supply starts to dwindle, people get cranky. The land could only support so many before the delicate balance between people and resources tipped over like a poorly balanced scale. Overfarming led to soil degradation, which in turn led to more food shortages, a vicious cycle that spiraled out of control faster than you can say ecological collapse. And speaking of cycles, let's not forget the cosmic element. The Maya were obsessed with cycles, from the celestial to the agricultural. Their calendars, as complex as a Swiss watch, were masterpieces of mathematical precision. But here's the kicker. These cycles, while brilliant, also locked the Maya into a worldview that was as rigid as their social structure. The belief that their universe operated in predictable cycles made it difficult to adapt to new and unforeseen challenges. It's like having a GPS that insists on taking you through a road that's been closed for ages. Stubborn adherence to outdated paths leads nowhere fast. So, how does one wrap up this historical saga without slipping into a dramatic monologue? The Maya's decline wasn't the result of a single cataclysmic event, but rather a slow unraveling, a tapestry of interconnected issues that ultimately led to their cities being reclaimed by the jungle. Their story is a poignant reminder that even the most sophisticated societies are vulnerable to the whims of nature, the pitfalls of internal discord, and the dangers of inflexibility. As we stand on the shoulders of these ancient giants, what can modern societies glean from their rise and fall? For starters, the importance of adaptability cannot be overstated. The Maya's reluctance to change and innovate in the face of mounting challenges is a cautionary tale for any society that clings too tightly to tradition at the expense of progress. In a world where climate change is a looming reality, the Maya remind us of the peril of ignoring environmental stewardship. Moreover, the social structure that prioritized hierarchy over inclusivity serves as a stark lesson in the need for balanced governance. A society that concentrates power in the hands of a few while ignoring the needs of the many is as unstable as a house of cards in a hurricane. The Maya's experience underscores the importance of equitable resource distribution and the value of listening to all voices within a community. But let's not forget their brilliance. The Maya were astronomers and architects, mathematicians and artists, who achieved incredible feats with the tools and knowledge at their disposal. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. In many ways, they remind us of the importance of curiosity, of asking why and how, and of the perpetual quest to understand the world around us. As we close this chapter on the Maya civilization, let's carry forward both their triumphs and their missteps, learning from the past to forge a future that honors the complexity and resilience of human societies. The Maya might have faded into the misty jungles of history, but their story continues to resonate, a timeless narrative of rise, fall, and the eternal dance of humanity with the forces of nature and time.